Before there were nations, kings, temples, or armies, Genesis begins with a world that had no human history at all. There was only the beginning, and the declaration that everything began with God. Yet the opening chapters do more than describe origins. They introduce the questions that shape the entire Bible. Why is the world filled with beauty and order, yet also marked by pain, conflict, and death? Why do human beings possess extraordinary dignity while repeatedly using their freedom to destroy? And if the first sanctuary was lost, could the way back into God's presence ever be opened again? To understand the rest of Scripture, we must return to the moment before rebellion, shame, and exile. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis does not begin by arguing for God's existence. It begins with God already present, sovereign, and active. The heavens and the earth describes the whole ordered world. Nothing in creation is His equal. At first, the earth is formless and empty, covered in darkness, while the Spirit of God hovers over the waters. Then God speaks. Light appears. The first movement is from darkness toward light, from unformed space toward ordered life. God separates light from darkness and names them day and night. Evening passes, morning comes. On the second day, God establishes the expanse of the sky. On the third, the waters are gathered so dry land appears, and the land produces vegetation, plants yielding seed, and trees bearing fruit. On the fourth day, lights are placed in the heavens to govern day and night, and to mark seasons, days, and years. Genesis does not treat them as divine powers, as many ancient cultures did. They are created lights, assigned a purpose by God. On the fifth day, the waters fill with living creatures, and the skies with birds. God blesses them and commands them to multiply. On the sixth day, the land brings forth animals. Then the rhythm slows. Something different is about to happen. God says, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule." The text does not define the image of God with one narrow explanation, but it clearly gives humanity a unique place within creation. Men and women are made to represent God's rule, exercise responsibility over the earth, and reflect the character of the one whose image they bear. Human worth does not begin with wealth, power, achievement, nationality, or status. It begins here. So God created mankind in His own image. Male and female, He created them. Both share the same God-given dignity. Both receive the blessing to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and govern it. Dominion is not permission for careless destruction. Authority is a stewardship. Humanity is called to cultivate what God has made while remaining under the Creator's authority. When God looks upon everything He has made, the verdict is no longer merely good. It is very good. The heavens and the earth are complete. On the seventh day, God rests. This does not suggest exhaustion. His rest marks completion. The world has been ordered as His realm, and the seventh day is blessed and made holy. But Genesis now moves closer. The broad view of the cosmos narrows to the ground, a garden, a man, and a command. Genesis 2 revisits humanity's creation from a more intimate perspective. The Lord God forms the man from the dust and breathes into his nostrils the breath of life. The man becomes a living being. Humanity is connected both to heaven and earth. The man is dust fragile and dependent, yet his life comes by God's breath. The Lord plants a garden in Eden and places the man there. Trees grow that are pleasing to the eye and good for food. A river flows from Eden, giving the garden a sense of abundance and sacred order. At its center stand two trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The man is placed in the garden to work it and keep it. Even before sin, humanity has a task. Work is not introduced as a curse. The later curse will make labor painful, but purposeful activity belongs to the world as God intended it. Then comes the first prohibition. The man may freely eat from every tree except one. He must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when he eats from it, he will surely die. The abundance comes first. The boundary comes second. God surrounds the man with provision and gives one command that reminds him he is a creature, not the creator. Wisdom cannot be seized on human terms without consequence. Moral authority belongs to God. But something is not yet complete. It is not good for the man to be alone. This is the first time Genesis says not good. The animals are brought before the man, and he names them, exercising his assigned authority, yet no suitable partner is found for him. The Lord causes the man to fall into a deep sleep, takes from his side, and fashions a woman. When she is brought to him, the man recognizes both unity and distinction. This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. The woman is not a lesser bearer of God's image. She is the corresponding partner the man lacked someone like him, yet distinct. Genesis presents marriage as a profound union in which a man leaves his father and mother, is joined to his wife, and the two become one flesh. The chapter ends with complete openness. The man and his wife are naked, and they feel no shame. There is nothing to hide, no accusation, no fear of exploitation. No fracture between the human beings, their own bodies the ground, or the God who gave them life. But in Genesis 3, another voice enters the garden. The serpent is more crafty than any other wild animal the Lord God had made. Later biblical writings connect the ancient serpent with the devil and Satan. But Genesis first draws attention to the words spoken in Eden. Did God really say? The attack begins by questioning the command and distorting the character of the one who gave it. The serpent presents generous provision as oppressive restriction. The woman corrects part of the distortion. They may eat from the trees, she says, but not from the tree in the middle of the garden. Yet the serpent directly contradicts God's warning. You will not certainly die. Then comes the promise beneath the temptation. Their eyes will be opened, and they will be like God, knowing good and evil. The tragedy is that the man and woman already bear God's image. They are already blessed and entrusted with a royal calling. But temptation offers a counterfeit path to grasp autonomy rather than receive life in trust and to define good and evil on their own terms. The woman sees that the fruit is good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom. She takes it and eats. She gives some to her husband who is with her, and he eats. There is no thunder in the description. No army appears, no city falls, only a hand reaching for fruit. Yet the world changes. Their eyes are opened, but not as the serpent promised. Their first discovery is not freedom, but exposure. They realize they are naked, sew fig leaves together and make coverings for themselves. Shame enters the human story. When they hear the Lord God in the garden, they hide among the trees. The creatures made to live openly before God now use his creation as concealment. The Lord calls to the man, "Where are you?" This is not the question of a God who lacks information. It draws the man from hiding and forces the rupture into the open. The man says he was afraid because he was naked. When God asks whether he ate from the forbidden tree, the response reveals how quickly sin fractures relationships. "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit and I ate it." He admits the act, but shifts responsibility toward the woman and indirectly toward God. The woman points to the serpent. "The serpent deceived me and I ate." The harmony of Genesis 2 is gone. Trust has become accusation. God addresses the serpent first. It is cursed and condemned to humiliation. Then comes a mysterious announcement of conflict between the serpent and the woman, and between their offspring. The woman's offspring will crush the serpent's head, while the serpent will strike his heel. Genesis does not explain the full meaning at this moment. It introduces a conflict that will continue beyond the garden. Christian readers have long understood this as the earliest glimpse of the serpent's final defeat, though the path of that victory remains hidden. The consequences then reach the woman's experience of childbearing and marriage, and the man's relationship with the ground. The soil that once yielded abundance will now resist him. Work remains, but it will be marked by toil, thorns, sweat, and frustration. Finally comes the sentence that reaches every generation. The man was formed from dust, and to dust he will return. Death has entered the human condition. The man names his wife Eve because she will become the mother of all the living. Even beneath judgment, the language of life continues. God also makes garments of skin for the man and woman and clothes them. Their own coverings were inadequate, but they are not sent out entirely uncovered. Then the Lord declares that humanity must not take from the tree of life and live forever in this fallen condition. So the man and woman are driven from Eden. Cherubim are stationed east of the garden, and a flaming sword guards the way to the tree of life. The first human beings leave abundance behind them. The garden remains, but its entrance is closed. Humanity still carries God's image. Yet now that image is lived out in a world of shame, toil, conflict, and mortality. Genesis has moved from light to darkness, from nakedness without shame to bodies covered in fear, from a garden filled with life to exile east of Eden. But the story does not end at the gate. Adam and Eve will have children. Their family will cultivate the ground for communities and carry the memory of Eden into another generation. The question is whether their children will resist the rebellion that drove their parents out, or whether the violence hidden inside the first act of disobedience will soon be revealed in a far more terrible form. Outside Eden, life continued, but it no longer unfolded in the world humanity had first received. Adam worked the ground that now resisted him. Eve gave birth in a world where pain, fear, and death had become part of human experience. Yet the birth of their first son carried hope. She named him Cain, and said that with the help of the Lord she had brought forth a man. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. The two brothers grew into different callings. Abel kept flocks, Cain worked the soil. In time, both brought offerings to the Lord. Cain brought some of the fruits of the ground, while Abel brought the firstborn of his flock and portions from their fat. The Lord regarded Abel and his offering with favor, but he did not regard Cain and his offering in the same way. Genesis does not explain every detail behind this distinction. Later scripture speaks of Abel's offering as being brought by faith, but Genesis places its emphasis on Cain's response. His face fell. The Lord warned him before the violence occurred. "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast?" Cain was told that if he did what was right, he would be accepted, but if he did not sin, was crouching at the door. It desired to control him, but he was called to master it. The image is unsettling. Sin is not presented as a harmless thought. It waits like a predator at the entrance, ready to seize the person who allows resentment to grow unchecked. Cain had not yet killed his brother. He stood at a moment of decision. Then Cain spoke to Abel, and when they were out in the field, he attacked his brother and killed him. The first death recorded after the fall is not described as a natural death in old age. It is murder. The first child born outside Eden becomes the killer of his own brother. Once again, the Lord asks a question. "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain replies, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The answer is both a lie and a rejection of responsibility. He refuses not only to confess what he has done, but also to acknowledge that one human life carries an obligation toward another. God tells Cain that Abel's blood cries out from the ground. The ground had already been cursed because of Adam's rebellion. Now it receives innocent blood. Cain, a worker of the soil, will find that the ground no longer yields its strength to him. He will become a restless wanderer. Cain fears that whoever finds him will kill him. The text does not pause to explain the full size or structure of the human population at this point. It simply records Cain's fear and God's response. The Lord places a sign on Cain so that no one who encounters him will kill him. The nature of that sign is never identified. It is not presented as a symbol for later ethnic groups' physical traits or social classes. Its function in the story is protection. Cain is judged, but his life is not handed over to immediate vengeance. He leaves the presence of the Lord and settles east of Eden in the land of Nod. The movement east continues. Adam and Eve had been driven east of the garden. Cain now travels farther east, carrying both judgment and protection into a world increasingly distant from Eden. Cain builds a city and names it after his son Enoch. Human culture begins to develop. His descendants raise livestock, create music, and work with bronze and iron. Genesis does not portray every achievement of civilization as evil. Creativity, technology, agriculture, and social organization all emerge from human beings who still bear God's image, but culture does not cure the human heart. One of Cain's descendants, Lamech, takes 2 wives, departing from the one flesh pattern introduced in Eden. He later boasts to them that he has killed a man for wounding him. Cain feared vengeance 7 times over. Lamech celebrates vengeance 77-fold. Violence has moved from a hidden act in a field to a public song of pride. Humanity is learning to build cities, forge tools, and make music. It is also learning to glorify retaliation. Another line, however, continues through Adam and Eve. Eve gives birth to Seth, whom she understands as another child granted in place of Abel. Seth has a son named Enosh, and Genesis says that at this time people began to call on the name of the Lord. The genealogy that follows repeatedly records life, children, years, and death. And then he died. The phrase echoes through the generations. Adam lives many years, but he dies. Seth dies. Enosh dies. Kenan dies. Mahalalel dies. Jared dies. The warning given in Eden is now visible across human history. One figure interrupts the pattern. Enoch walks faithfully with God, and then he is no more because God takes him. Genesis gives few details, but his brief account shows that death does not have the final word in exactly the same way for every person. Then the genealogy reaches a man named Noah. His father Lamech, not the violent descendant of Cain, but another man with the same name, expresses hope that Noah will bring comfort from the painful toil of the ground the Lord had cursed. The name Noah sounds like the Hebrew word associated with rest or comfort. His birth carries the longing of generations laboring under the consequences of Eden. Could this child bring relief? By Noah's time, the human population had increased, but so had corruption. Genesis 6 introduces a difficult passage involving the sons of God, the daughters of humans, and the Nephilim. The text has produced several major interpretations. Some understand the sons of God as heavenly beings who crossed a forbidden boundary. Others identify them with powerful rulers or warrior kings who took women for themselves. Still others have understood the passage as describing intermarriage between different human lines. Genesis does not provide enough detail to settle every question with certainty. What it does make unmistakably clear is the condition of the world that follows. Human wickedness is great upon the earth. Every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart is described as continually evil. The earth is corrupt in God's sight and filled with violence. The problem is no longer one angry brother. Violence has become a defining condition of human society. Genesis describes God as grieved that he made humanity on the earth. This language reveals neither ignorance nor loss of control. It communicates the depth of divine sorrow over a creation that has turned against its intended purpose. Judgment is announced. Humanity, animals, and the living world connected to human rule will face destruction through a flood. But Noah finds favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah is described as a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and one who walks faithfully with God. This does not mean he is presented as morally perfect. His story will later make that clear. But in a generation defined by corruption, Noah trusts and obeys. God tells him to build an ark. The vessel is to be made according to specific dimensions, with rooms covering levels and an opening. Noah is commanded to bring his family inside, along with representatives of the animals, and to store food. God also announces that he will establish his covenant with Noah. The ark is not merely a shelter built by human ingenuity. It is the means God appoints to preserve life through judgment. Noah does everything God commands him. The years of construction are not narrated in detail. Genesis does not describe the reactions of neighbors, long public debates, or scenes of ridicule. Such images often appear in later retellings, but the biblical text moves with restraint. The day arrives. Noah enters the ark with his wife, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. The animals come according to their kinds. After they enter, the Lord shuts them in. Then the waters begin. Rain falls for 40 days and 40 nights. The springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens open. Water rises over the earth, lifting the ark above the ground. The flood is described as a reversal of creation. In Genesis 1, God separated waters and brought dry land into view. In the flood, the boundaries collapse. The waters, once divided above and below, seem to close over the ordered world. The highest mountains are covered. Creatures that breathe upon the land perish. Everything outside the ark is overwhelmed. This is not presented as spectacle for entertainment. It is judgment upon a world filled with corruption and violence. Yet the severity of the scene also raises a question that will continue through Scripture. How can a holy God confront evil without abandoning his purpose for creation? Inside the ark, life is preserved. Genesis says that God remembers Noah. In biblical language, divine remembrance does not mean God had forgotten and then suddenly recalled him. It means that God acts faithfully toward the person and promise he has chosen to preserve. A wind passes over the earth, and the waters begin to recede. The springs of the deep and the floodgates of the heavens are closed. Rain stops. Eventually, the ark comes to rest on the mountains of Ararat. This refers to a region, not necessarily to the single modern peak commonly associated with the name. The waters continue to decrease. Noah sends out a raven, then a dove. The dove first finds no place to rest and returns. 7 days later, Noah sends it again, and it returns with a freshly plucked olive leaf. The small leaf carries enormous meaning. Dry land is emerging. Life is returning. When Noah sends the dove a third time, it does not return. After the ground dries, God tells Noah to come out. His family and the animals leave the ark to multiply across the earth. Noah's first recorded act outside is not to build a house or claim territory. He builds an altar. He takes clean animals and birds and offers burnt offerings to the Lord. God responds by declaring that he will never again curse the ground in this same way because of humanity, even though the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth. The statement is striking. The flood has washed the world, but it has not transformed the human heart. The earth has been remade, yet the inner problem remains. God promises that as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will not cease. Noah and his sons receive a blessing that echoes Adam's original commission: be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. But the world after the flood is not identical to Eden. Fear now marks the relationship between humanity and the animals. Human beings are permitted to eat meat, though blood, the sign of life, is treated as belonging uniquely to God. The taking of human life is addressed with special seriousness because humanity is made in God's image. Even after the fall, even after generations of violence, even after the flood, the image of God remains the foundation of human worth. Then God establishes his covenant, not only with Noah and his family, but with every living creature and future generation. Never again will a flood destroy all life in this way. The sign of the covenant is placed in the clouds, the rainbow. A weapon-shaped bow appears in the sky, but it is not aimed toward the earth. It becomes a visible sign of divine restraint and covenant mercy. When clouds gather and the bow appears, God says he will remember the everlasting covenant between himself and every living creature. The first great section of the flood story ends with stability restored. The earth has emerged from the waters. The seasons will continue. Humanity has received a new beginning. But Genesis immediately refuses to let Noah become an idealized hero. Noah plants a vineyard, makes wine, becomes drunk, and lies uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, sees his father's nakedness and tells his brothers outside. Shem and Japheth walk backward with a garment between them covering their father without looking upon him. When Noah awakens and learns what happened, he speaks words that will shape the relationships among his descendants. Canaan is cursed, while Shem and Japheth receive blessing. The passage is brief and difficult, and it has often been badly misused. The curse is directed toward Canaan, not toward all of Ham's descendants. Nothing in the text supports later attempts to use the story as justification for racial hierarchy or slavery. Within Genesis, the episode serves another purpose. Noah was expected to bring comfort from the cursed ground. He survives the judgment and becomes the father of a renewed humanity. Yet he cannot restore Eden. The survivor of the flood is still vulnerable to shame. His family is still capable of dishonor and division. A new world has begun, but it is inhabited by the same kind of human heart. The descendants of Noah spread through their families, languages, lands, and nations. Genesis 10 presents a broad map of the peoples known to the ancient biblical world. From Japheth come peoples associated with regions stretching across the coastlands and the north. From Ham come lines connected with Egypt, Cush, Put, and Canaan. From Shem comes the family line that will eventually lead toward Abram. Among Ham's descendants, Genesis pauses over Nimrod, described as a mighty warrior and hunter. The beginning of his kingdom includes Babel in the land of Shinar. The list of nations shows humanity moving outward from one family toward many peoples. But Genesis 11 turns back to explain a decisive moment in that dispersion. At this stage, humanity shares one language and common speech. As people move eastward, they settle on a plain in Shinar. They discover how to make bricks and use bitumen for mortar. Their technological ability gives them the means to build on a scale that earlier generations could not. They say to one another, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." The language echoes several earlier themes. God had told humanity to fill the earth. The builders fear being scattered. They gather in one place. God had given humanity identity and purpose. As his image bearers, the builders seek to make a name for themselves. They use unity, organization, and technology not simply to build, but to secure their future independently of God's command. The tower is often imagined as an attempt to climb physically into heaven. It may be better understood within the ancient world as a monumental structure associated with human power, religious ambition, and the desire to create a center that could not be ignored. Whatever its precise form, the purpose is clear. Humanity wants greatness without dependence, unity without obedience, and security without trust. The Lord comes down to see the city and tower. The wording carries deliberate irony. The structure humanity believes reaches the heavens is so small before God that he must come down to examine it. God observes that a united humanity committed to this course will continue using its shared power in ways that deepen rebellion. So he confuses their language. The people can no longer understand one another. Construction stops. The population is scattered across the earth. The city is called Babel, associated in Genesis with confusion. The people had tried to prevent scattering, and scattering becomes the result. They had tried to make their name great, and their unfinished city becomes a monument to human limitation. The pattern that began in Eden has now expanded across civilization. Eve saw that the fruit was desirable for gaining wisdom. Cain refused responsibility for his brother. Lamech glorified revenge. The violent world before the flood corrupted the earth. At Babel, humanity joins together to create greatness on its own terms. Again and again, human beings grasp for what they believe will secure life. Again and again, the result is exile, division, and distance. But after Babel, Genesis makes another dramatic turn. The story narrows from nations to one family line. From Shem comes Arphaxad, then generations whose names lead eventually to Terah. Terah becomes the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran dies in the land of his birth, Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram marries Sarai. Nahor marries Milcah. Then Genesis adds one short sentence that will shape everything that follows. Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. The world has been divided into nations. The people have been scattered. Human ambition has failed to reverse the curse. And now the future of the story rests upon a man with no land of his own and a woman who cannot bear a child. Terah takes Abram, Sarai, and his grandson Lot and sets out from Ur toward Canaan. But the family stops at Haran and settles there. They are moving toward the land that will become central to the biblical story, yet they have not reached it. The nations stand divided. The promise has not yet been spoken. The chosen family has no child. Then, into this condition of uncertainty, God will call Abram to leave everything familiar and walk toward a land he has never seen. The world after Babel was divided by language, territory, and ambition. Nations had spread across the earth, but the deeper problem remained unchanged. Humanity could build cities, organize kingdoms, and preserve family lines, yet none of these achievements could restore what had been lost in Eden. Then God spoke to one man. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." The command required more than physical movement. Abram was being called to leave the structures that had given him identity, his homeland, his extended family, and the security of his father's household. He was not given a complete map. He was given a promise. God said he would make Abram into a great nation. He would bless him, make his name great, and make him a blessing. Those who blessed him would be blessed, and those who treated him with contempt would face judgment. Then came the promise that placed Abram's story inside the future of every nation. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. At Babel, humanity had tried to make its own name great. Abram was told that God would make his name great. The builders of Babel feared being scattered. Abram was commanded to leave. They sought security through construction and concentration. Abram would have to live by trust, moving toward a land he had never seen. This is the great shift in Genesis. The story begins with all creation moves through all humanity and then narrows to one family. But the purpose of that family is never merely private. Abram is chosen so that blessing may eventually reach beyond him. Abram obeys. At 75 years old, he leaves Haran with Sarai, his nephew Lot, their possessions, and the people connected to their household. They travel toward Canaan. When Abram arrives near Shechem at the great tree of Moreh, the land is already inhabited by the Canaanites. The promise does not lead him into empty territory. It leads him into a land where other people's cities and powers are already established. There the Lord appears to Abram and says, "To your offspring I will give this land." The statement immediately creates tension. Abram has reached the land, but he does not possess it. He has received a promise of offspring, but Sarai is unable to conceive. Everything God has promised appears to stand beyond Abram's present circumstances. Abram builds an altar to the Lord. He moves toward the hill country between Bethel and Ai, and builds another altar there. These altars do not mark political control, they mark worship and trust. Abram is in the land, but he lives as a traveler. He continues south toward the Negev, and then the first major threat appears. A famine strikes the land. The place of promise cannot presently sustain him. Abram goes down to Egypt to live there temporarily. Egypt, nourished by the Nile, often served as a place of refuge during regional famine. Yet the move also places Abram and Sarai under the authority of a foreign king. As they approach Egypt, Abram becomes afraid. Sarai is beautiful, and Abram fears that the Egyptians will kill him in order to take her. He asks her to say that she is his sister, so that he will be treated well and his life will be spared. Later Genesis reveals that Sarai is indeed related to Abram, but the strategy is still deceptive. Abram presents a partial truth to conceal the most important reality. She is his wife. The man called to trust God now attempts to preserve the promise through fear. Sarai is taken into Pharaoh's household. Because of her, Abram receives sheep, cattle, servants, donkeys, and camels. From the outside, the plan appears successful. Abram is alive, his possessions are increasing, but the promise is in greater danger than before. The woman through whom the family's future must come has been taken into another man's house. The Lord intervenes. Pharaoh and his household are afflicted with serious diseases. When Pharaoh discovers the truth, he confronts Abram. "What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife?" The rebuke comes not from Abram to a pagan ruler, but from the ruler to Abram. Pharaoh returns Sarai and orders Abram to leave Egypt with everything he owns. Genesis does not hide the weakness of the man God has called. Abram is capable of faith, but also fear. He builds altars, but he also manipulates circumstances. The promise will continue not because Abram acts perfectly, but because God remains faithful. Abram returns to the Negev and then to the place near Bethel where he had previously built an altar. There he again calls on the name of the Lord. Lot travels with him, but both men have become wealthy. Their flocks, herds, and tents are so numerous that the land cannot support them together. Conflict develops between Abram's herders and Lot's herders. The tension is made more dangerous by the fact that Canaanites and Perizzites are also living in the land. A divided household in contested territory could easily become vulnerable. Abram takes the initiative. He tells Lot that there should be no quarrel between them because they are family. He offers Lot the first choice of land. Lot looks toward the Jordan Valley. Before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the region appears well-watered, like the garden of the Lord and the land of Egypt. Lot chooses what looks most fertile. He moves east and settles among the cities of the plain, pitching his tents near Sodom. Genesis immediately warns the reader that the people of Sodom are wicked and sin greatly against the Lord. Lot's choice is economically understandable, but spiritually dangerous. He evaluates the land by what his eyes can see, while the moral condition of the region receives less attention. Abram remains in Canaan. After Lot separates from him, the Lord tells Abram to look in every direction, north, south, east, and west. All the land he can see will one day belong to him and his offspring. God compares Abram's future descendants to the dust of the earth. If the dust could be counted, then his offspring could be counted. Yet Abram still has no child. He moves near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron and builds another altar. Meanwhile, Lot's decision draws him into an international conflict. Genesis 14 describes a war involving a coalition of eastern kings and the kings of the cities of the plain. The names and geography can be difficult for modern listeners, but the central movement is clear. For years, the cities around Sodom had been subject to a powerful king named Chedorlaomer. When they rebelled, Chedorlaomer and his allies marched westward, defeating several peoples and then confronting the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela. The kings of the plain are defeated. Some fall into tar pits, while others flee to the hills. Sodom and Gomorrah are plundered. Lot, who has now moved from living near Sodom to living within it, is taken captive with his possessions. One survivor escapes and brings the news to Abram. Abram is described here as the Hebrew, a term that distinguishes him from the surrounding groups. When he hears that his relative has been captured, he gathers 318 trained men born in his household and pursues the invading forces. This number shows that Abram's household is substantial, but it remains small compared with the armies of kings. Abram divides his forces during the night attacks and drives the enemy north. He rescues Lot, the women, the other captives, and the stolen possessions. The man who had once acted in fear before Pharaoh now risks himself to rescue the nephew who chose the better-looking land. As Abram returns, two kings come out to meet him. The first is the king of Sodom. The second is Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of God Most High. Melchizedek brings bread and wine and blesses Abram. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Abram gives him a tenth of everything. Genesis provides no genealogy, origin story, or account of Melchizedek's later life. His sudden appearance made him an important figure in later biblical reflection, especially in Psalm 110 and the book of Hebrews. But within Genesis, his role is already significant. He identifies Abram's victory as a gift from God Most High, not merely the achievement of military strength. Then the king of Sodom offers Abram the recovered possessions, asking only that the people be returned. Abram refuses. He has sworn to the Lord God Most High that he will not take even a thread or sandal strap belonging to the king of Sodom. He does not want that king to say, "I made Abram rich." The contrast with Egypt is striking. In Egypt, Abram gained wealth through deception and fear. After rescuing Lot, he refuses wealth that might compromise the meaning of God's blessing. But victory creates another question. Abram has rescued Lot. He has defeated kings. He has been blessed by a priest of God Most High. Yet he still has no son. After these events, the word of the Lord comes to Abram in a vision. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." Abram answers with a question that has been growing beneath every promise. What can God give him if he remains childless? A servant in his household, Eliezer of Damascus, appears positioned to become his heir. In the ancient world, a trusted household servant could sometimes inherit when there was no son. Abram is not rejecting God. He is bringing the contradiction into the open. God has promised descendants. Abram's body is aging. Sarai remains unable to conceive. Time is moving forward. The Lord tells him that the servant will not be his heir. A son coming from Abram himself will inherit. Then God brings him outside. Look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, so shall your offspring be. Abram believes the Lord, and God credits it to him as righteousness. This verse becomes central to later biblical teaching. Abram is counted righteous not because he has completed the promise, but because he trusts the one who made it. Yet Abram also asks how he can know that he will possess the land. God directs him to prepare animals for a covenant ceremony. Abram cuts several animals in two and arranges the pieces opposite each other, while birds of prey descend upon the carcasses and Abram drives them away. As the sun is setting, Abram falls into a deep sleep, and a terrifying darkness comes over him. Then God reveals that the path to the promise will not be immediate. Abram's descendants will be strangers in a land not their own. They will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. But God will judge the nation they serve, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. Abram himself will die in peace at an old age. His descendants will return to Canaan in a later generation, when the sin of the Amorites has reached its full measure. This announcement explains something essential about the biblical story. The promised land will not be seized instantly. Abraham's family will pass through suffering, delay, and foreign oppression. God's judgment upon the peoples of Canaan will also not come before the appointed time. When darkness has fallen, a smoking firepot and a blazing torch pass between the pieces of the animals. In ancient covenant rituals, passing between divided animals symbolized the seriousness of the commitment. It was as if the covenant maker declared that death should follow if the covenant were broken. But in Genesis 15, Abram does not walk between the pieces. The symbols of God's presence pass through. The covenant rests upon God's commitment. That day, the Lord formally promises the land to Abram's descendants, describing its broad boundaries and naming the peoples who inhabit it. But the promise of a son still appears impossible. Sarai decides to act. She has an Egyptian servant named Hagar, possibly acquired during the family's time in Egypt. Sarai tells Abram that since the Lord has prevented her from bearing children, perhaps she can build a family through Hagar. In the ancient world, the use of a servant woman to produce an heir for a childless household was not unknown, but cultural acceptance does not remove the human cost. Abram agrees. Hagar becomes pregnant. Once she knows she is carrying Abram's child, tension grows between her and Sarai. Hagar begins to look upon her mistress with contempt. Sarai blames Abram, and Abram leaves Hagar under Sarai's authority. Sarai treats her harshly. Hagar flees into the wilderness. Once again, the family of promise is in danger because human beings are trying to control the fulfillment of God's word. And once again, the most vulnerable person carries the greatest burden. The angel of the Lord finds Hagar near a spring on the road toward Shur. This is the first appearance in Scripture of the angel of the Lord, and the encounter is remarkable. Hagar is an Egyptian servant woman fleeing this treatment. She has little social power, yet God sees her in the wilderness. The angel asks where she has come from and where she is going. Hagar can answer the first question. She is running away from Sarai. She does not answer the second. She has no clear future. The angel tells her to return, but also gives her a promise. Her descendants will become too numerous to count. She will give birth to a son and name him Ishmael, meaning God hears, because the Lord has heard of her misery. The text also describes the difficult future Ishmael will face and the conflict that will surround his descendants. Hagar responds by giving a name to the God who has spoken to her. You are the God who sees me. She marvels that she has seen the one who sees her. The spring becomes associated with this encounter. Hagar returns, gives birth, and Abram names the child Ishmael. Abram is 86 years old. For 13 years, Ishmael is Abram's only son. Then, when Abram is 99, the Lord appears again. I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless." God confirms the covenant and announces that Abram will become the father of many nations. Then Abram's name changes. He will no longer be called Abram, commonly understood as exalted father. His name will be Abraham, father of many. The new name sounds almost impossible when spoken over a 99-year-old man with one son born through a servant and a wife long past the age of childbearing. Yet the name makes the promise part of Abraham's identity. Kings will come from him. Nations will arise from him. The covenant will continue through future generations. God will give Canaan as an everlasting possession within the covenant purpose and will be the God of Abraham's descendants. The sign of this covenant will be circumcision. Every male in Abraham's household, whether born there or purchased from a foreigner, is to receive the sign. The covenant mark is placed upon the body and carried into future generations. Then God turns specifically to Sarai. Her name will no longer be Sarai. She will be called Sarah. God will bless her and give Abraham a son through her. She will become the mother of nations, and kings will come from her. Abraham falls face down and laughs. The promise seems beyond human possibility. He asks whether a son can be born to a man who is 100 years old, and whether Sarah can bear a child at 90. Then he pleads, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. Abraham cares for Ishmael. The years have made the boy part of his hope for the future. God answers that Ishmael will indeed be blessed. He will be fruitful, become the father of 12 rulers, and grow into a great nation. But the covenant line will be established through a son Sarah will bear. His name will be Isaac, a name connected with laughter. The child's name will preserve the memory of how impossible the promise sounded. Before the day ends, Abraham obeys. He circumcises Ishmael and every male in his household. Abraham himself receives the sign at 99 years old, and Ishmael at 13. The covenant has been confirmed. The names have changed, the sign has been given, but Sarah is still childless. Abraham has heard that within a year, the impossible child will be born. Before that promise is fulfilled, however, visitors will arrive at his tent. The outcry from Sodom will reach its appointed moment, and Abraham will be forced to watch as judgment descends upon the region where Lot has chosen to live. Abraham had received a new name, a covenant sign, and a promise so specific that it could no longer be interpreted in another way. Sarah herself would bear the son. The child would be called Isaac, and he would be born within a year. Yet before the promise entered the world as a living child, Abraham would witness judgment repeat an old failure and learn that the future of the covenant could never be secured by human calculation alone. Genesis 18 opens during the heat of the day. Abraham is sitting at the entrance of his tent near the great trees of Mamre when he looks up and sees 3 men standing nearby. He runs to meet them, bows low, and urges them not to pass by without accepting hospitality. Water is brought for their feet. Sarah prepares bread from fine flour. Abraham selects a tender calf, and the meal is served beneath the trees. The scene is quiet, but the visitors are not ordinary travelers. Genesis moves between speaking of the 3 men and speaking of the Lord. The text does not explain every detail of their appearance, yet it makes clear that Abraham is receiving a divine visitation. One of the visitors asks, "Where is your wife Sarah?" Abraham answers that she is in the tent. Then the promise is repeated. The Lord says that he will return at the appointed time and Sarah will have a son. Sarah is listening from the entrance of the tent. She and Abraham are old, and she is beyond the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughs to herself. Her laughter is not the joy that will later fill the household. It is the response of someone who has carried disappointment for years and now hears a promise that appears to deny everything her body and experience have taught her. The Lord asks Abraham why Sarah laughed. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Sarah, afraid, denies laughing, but the Lord answers, yes, you did laugh. The exchange is brief, almost uncomfortable in its directness. God does not abandon the promise because Sarah struggles to believe it. Her doubt is exposed, but the word remains unchanged. At the appointed time, she will have a son. The visitors rise and look toward Sodom. Abraham walks with them as they leave. Then Genesis allows the reader to hear the divine deliberation. Abraham is to become a great and powerful nation, and all nations will be blessed through him. God has chosen him so that he may direct his children and household to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. The covenant is not only about receiving land and descendants. Abraham's family is called to embody justice and righteousness. That calling now stands beside the cities of the plain. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave. The language of outcry often refers to the cry of victims, the sound of injustice and suffering rising before God. The Lord declares that he will examine the matter. This does not imply uncertainty. It communicates the justice of divine judgment. The cities will not be condemned by rumor, impulse, or uncontrolled anger. The two messengers continue toward Sodom, while Abraham remains before the Lord. Then Abraham draws near and asks one of the boldest questions in Genesis. Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? He begins with 50 righteous people. Would God spare the city for their sake? The Lord says he would. Abraham continues 45, 40, 30, 20, finally 10. At each stage, Abraham speaks with humility, acknowledging that he is dust and ashes. Yet he continues because he knows that the judge of all the earth must do what is right. God agrees that he would not destroy the city if 10 righteous people were found there. Abraham returns home. The two angels arrive at Sodom in the evening. Lot is sitting at the city gate, a place where elders and influential men often conducted public business. He is no longer merely camping near Sodom. He has become part of the city's life. When he sees the visitors, he rises, bows, and urges them to stay in his house rather than spend the night in the square. They initially refuse, but Lot insists. He prepares a meal, and they enter his home. Before they lie down, men from across the city surround the house. Genesis emphasizes the breadth of the crowd, young and old, from every part of Sodom. They demand that Lot bring out the visitors so they can sexually violate them. The scene reveals more than private immorality. It portrays collective violence, the abuse of strangers, and a city where power is used to humiliate and destroy. Lot steps outside and shuts the door behind him. He begs the crowd not to act wickedly. Then he offers his 2 daughters instead. The proposal is horrifying. Lot attempts to protect his guests through the sacrifice of those within his own household. Genesis records the act without approving it. This is what life in Sodom has done to his judgment. The crowd rejects him. They accuse Lot of coming as a foreigner and now trying to judge them. They press forward to break down the door. The messengers pull Lot inside and strike the men outside with blindness, yet the crowd continues searching for the entrance. Even judgment beginning before their eyes does not turn them back. The angels tell Lot to gather everyone connected to him because the city is about to be destroyed. Lot goes to speak with the men pledged to marry his daughters, but they think he is joking. At dawn, the angels urge Lot to hurry. Still, he hesitates. The text does not explain whether he is stunned, reluctant to abandon his possessions, or unable to accept that the city will truly fall. Whatever the reason, he does not move quickly enough, so the angels seize Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters by the hand and lead them out. Genesis explains why the Lord is merciful to them. Lot is not rescued because he responds with flawless faith. He is brought out by divine compassion. The family is commanded to flee for their lives, not look back, and not stop anywhere in the plain. Lot pleads that he cannot reach the mountains. He asks permission to escape to a small nearby town called Zoar. The request is granted. Then the sun rises. The Lord rains burning sulfur upon Sodom and Gomorrah. The cities, the plain, the inhabitants, and the vegetation are overthrown. Lot's wife looks back and becomes a pillar of salt. The text does not describe how long she looked or everything represented in that glance, but she turns toward the city from which she had been commanded to flee, and she does not continue with the others. Early that morning, Abraham returns to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looks down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and sees dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. The cities are gone. Genesis then explains that when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham and brought Lot out of the catastrophe. Abraham's intercession mattered, but the text does not say Sodom contained the 10 righteous people for whom the city would have been spared. Lot is rescued from the judgment while the city itself falls. Lot leaves Zoar and lives in a cave in the mountains with his daughters. The aftermath is bleak. The daughters believe that no men remain available to continue their family line. They make their father drunk on 2 successive nights and sleep with him without his awareness. Both become pregnant. Their sons become the ancestors of Moab and Ammon peoples, who will later have complicated and often hostile relationships with Israel. The story of Lot ends not with the prosperity he saw in the Jordan Valley, but with isolation, intoxication, and a family shaped by fear and moral confusion. The land that looked like Eden did not lead him back to Eden. It nearly consumed him. Abraham moves from the region of Mamre toward the Negev and settles for a time in Gerar, where Abimelech rules. There, Abraham once again says that Sarah is his sister. The old fear returns. Years have passed since Egypt. Abraham has received repeated promises, witnessed military victory, entered covenant, and interceded before God. Yet spiritual growth has not erased every weakness. Abimelech takes Sarah into his household. Once again, the promised mother is placed in danger because Abraham attempts to protect himself through deception. But God comes to Abimelech in a dream and warns him that Sarah is a married woman. Abimelech protests that he acted with a clear conscience because both Abraham and Sarah said they were siblings. God acknowledges this and declares that he prevented Abimelech from touching her. He commands him to return Sarah, explaining that Abraham is a prophet who will pray for him. The word prophet appears here for the first time in the Bible. Its use is surprising. Abraham has acted wrongly, yet he remains the person through whom God has chosen to work. His calling does not make his failure acceptable, but his failure does not force God to abandon the covenant. Abimelech confronts Abraham. "What have you done to us?" Abraham explains that he believed there was no fear of God in that place, and that he might be killed because of Sarah. He also explains that Sarah is indeed his half-sister, though she became his wife. Again, a technical truth had been used to create a false impression. Abimelech returns Sarah, gives Abraham livestock and servants, and allows him to live in the land. He also gives silver as a public vindication of Sarah. Abraham prays, and God heals Abimelech's household, where the women had been unable to bear children. The irony is unmistakable. Abraham prays for fertility in another man's household, while his own wife has waited decades for a child. Then the appointed time arrives. The Lord does for Sarah what he had promised. She becomes pregnant and bears a son to Abraham in his old age. Abraham is 100 years old. He names the child Isaac. 8 days later, Isaac is circumcised, according to the covenant command. Sarah says that God has brought her laughter, and that everyone who hears will laugh with her. The laughter of disbelief has become the laughter of joy. The impossible child is now in her arms. The promise has not come through Pharaoh's wealth, Hagar's pregnancy, military strength, or Abraham's attempts to preserve himself. Isaac is born because God visited Sarah as he said he would. The child grows and is weaned. Abraham holds a great feast, but joy does not remove the unresolved tension within the household. Sarah sees Ishmael, the son Hagar bore to Abraham, mocking or playing in a way she considers threatening. The exact force of the Hebrew word has been debated, but Sarah's response is severe. She tells Abraham to send away the servant woman and her son, insisting that Ishmael must never share Isaac's inheritance. The matter deeply distresses Abraham because Ishmael is his son. God tells him not to be distressed concerning the boy and Hagar. He is to listen to Sarah regarding the covenant line, because the promised offspring will be counted through Isaac. But Ishmael will also become a nation because he is Abraham's child. Early the next morning, Abraham gives Hagar bread and a skin of water and sends her away with the boy. She wanders in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water is gone, she places the boy under a bush and moves some distance away because she cannot bear to watch him die. She begins to weep. The child also cries. God hears the boy. The angel of God calls to Hagar from heaven and asks why she is troubled. She is told not to be afraid because God has heard the boy where he lies. She is commanded to lift him up and take him by the hand. Then God opens her eyes and she sees a well. The water was what she needed, but grief had hidden the way forward. She fills the skin and gives the boy a drink. God is with Ishmael as he grows. He lives in the wilderness, becomes an archer, and settles in the desert of Paran. Hagar finds him a wife from Egypt. The covenant line will continue through Isaac, but Ishmael is not forgotten. The God who heard Hagar's misery before Ishmael was born hears the boy in the wilderness after he has been sent away. Around this time, Abimelech and his military commander recognize that God is with Abraham in everything he does. They seek a treaty, asking Abraham not to deal falsely with them or their descendants. Abraham agrees, but raises a dispute about a well seized by Abimelech's servants. The two men establish an agreement. Abraham sets apart 7 ewe lambs as testimony that he dug the well. The place becomes known as Beersheba, a name associated with both 7 and oath. Abraham plants a tamarisk tree there and calls upon the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. He remains in the land of the Philistines for a long time. The promise appears more secure than ever. Isaac has been born. Ishmael has survived. Abraham has wells, livestock, treaties, and growing recognition among neighboring rulers. Then Genesis opens one of its most difficult chapters with a direct statement: God tested Abraham. God calls his name Abraham. He answers, "Here I am." Then comes the command: "Take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Every phrase increases the weight. Your son, your only son, the one you love, Isaac. Ishmael is also Abraham's son, but Isaac is the unique son of the covenant, the child through whom God has said the promised line will continue. The command appears to place the promise against the giver of the promise. Genesis does not describe Abraham's emotions. It does not record an argument, a protest, or a conversation with Sarah. It says that early the next morning, Abraham saddles his donkey. He takes 2 servants and Isaac. He cuts wood for the offering and begins the journey. For 3 days they travel. The length of the journey leaves time for the command to settle over every step. Abraham has already waited decades for this child. Now he walks toward a mountain, carrying the wood upon which Isaac may die. On the third day, Abraham sees the place in the distance. He tells the servants to remain with the donkey. "We will worship, and then we will come back to you." The statement may reveal hope that God will somehow preserve or restore Isaac, though Genesis does not explain exactly what Abraham understands. Later scripture interprets Abraham as trusting that God could even raise the dead. Abraham places the wood on Isaac. He carries the fire and the knife. The two walk together. Then Isaac speaks. "My father." Abraham answers, "Here I am, my son." Isaac observes that they have fire and wood, but no lamb. "Where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham replies, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." Again, the two continue together. They reach the place God has indicated. Abraham builds an altar and arranges the wood. Then he binds Isaac and lays him upon the altar. Genesis gives no speech from Isaac and no description of a struggle. The silence makes the scene more severe, not less. Abraham reaches out and takes the knife. Then the angel of the Lord calls to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham!" He answers for the third time in this chapter, "Here I am." The command comes immediately. Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. The test has reached its limit. God says that Abraham has shown that he fears God because he has not withheld his son, his only son. Abraham looks up and sees a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. He takes the ram and sacrifices it in place of Isaac. The substitute dies. The son lives. Abraham names the place, "The Lord will provide." The saying continues, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord calls again and confirms the promise with solemn language. Abraham's descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. They will possess the gates of their enemies, and through Abraham's offspring, all nations will be blessed because he obeyed. The test does not create the promise, but it reveals the depth of Abraham's trust. This passage must not be separated from its ending. God does not permit Isaac to be sacrificed. The narrative rejects the idea that the covenant will advance through the death of the promised child at his father's hand. God provides the offering. Later scripture will return to Moriah sacrifice beloved sonship and divine provision in profound ways. Yet, within Genesis, the immediate meaning is clear. Abraham cannot secure the promise by possessing Isaac, controlling Isaac, or even protecting Isaac from every risk. The future belongs to God. Abraham and Isaac return to the servants, and together they travel back to Beersheba. Isaac has survived the altar. But the family is about to enter another transition. Sarah, whose long barrenness had once seemed to threaten the entire promise, will die. Abraham, who has been promised the whole land, will be forced to negotiate for one small piece of it, a burial place for his wife. And Isaac, the son, who returned from Moriah, will soon need a wife through whom the covenant can move into the next generation. Abraham and Isaac return from Moriah, but Genesis does not describe a conversation between them about what had happened on the mountain. Instead, the story moves into loss. Sarah dies at Kiriath Arba, later known as Hebron, in the land of Canaan. She is 127 years old. Abraham goes to mourn for her and weep over her. The woman who left Mesopotamia with him endured famine, entered foreign courts, waded through decades of barrenness, laughed at an impossible promise, and finally gave birth to Isaac, is gone. Yet Sarah's death also exposes a tension that has existed throughout Abraham's story. God has promised him the land of Canaan, but Abraham does not own enough land to bury his wife. He approaches the Hittites living in the region and describes himself as a foreigner and temporary resident among them. He asks to purchase a burial site. The local leaders recognize Abraham as a powerful and respected man. They offer him the use of their finest tombs, but Abraham does not want merely to borrow a burial place. He wants a legal possession that cannot later be disputed. He asks for the cave of Machpelah, owned by a man named Ephron. The negotiation takes place publicly at the city gate, where legal and commercial matters are witnessed. Ephron first appears to offer both the field and the cave as a gift, but Abraham insists on paying the full price. Ephron names 400 shekels of silver. The amount appears high, but Abraham does not bargain. He weighs out the silver before the witnesses and purchases the field, the cave, and the trees within its boundaries. For the first time, Abraham legally possesses part of the land God promised him. It is not a city, a kingdom, or a vast territory. It is a grave. The first permanent piece of the promised land becomes a place of burial, a declaration that Abraham's family expects its future to remain connected to Canaan even through death. Sarah is buried in the cave of Machpelah. Years later, Abraham himself will be buried there. Isaac and Rebekah will also be laid there, followed by Jacob and Leah. The cave becomes a family tomb and a visible claim of faith. They may live as strangers, but they believe God has not forgotten the land. Abraham is now old, and the Lord has blessed him in every way. But another urgent question remains. Isaac needs a wife. The covenant cannot move into the next generation if the promised son remains alone. Abraham does not want Isaac to marry one of the Canaanite women around them. Yet he also refuses to send Isaac back permanently to the land his family left. He calls his oldest servant, the man responsible for everything he owns, and places him under a solemn oath. The servant must travel to Abraham's relatives and find a wife for Isaac from among them. The servant asks what he should do if the woman refuses to come. Should he take Isaac back to Mesopotamia? Abraham answers firmly, "Make sure that you do not take my son back there." Abraham himself had been called to leave that land. Isaac must not reverse the journey. The promise is connected to Canaan, even though the bride will come from Abraham's extended family. Abraham expresses confidence that the Lord who called him and promised the land to his offspring will send his angel ahead of the servant. But he does not pretend to control the woman's decision. If she refuses to come, the servant will be released from the oath. The servant takes 10 camels and valuable gifts and travels toward the city of Nahor in northern Mesopotamia. When he arrives, it is evening, the time when women come out to draw water. He stops beside a well. The servant now faces a task he cannot complete through wealth or negotiation alone. He does not merely need to locate Abraham's relatives. He must identify a woman willing to leave her home and travel to a distant land to marry a man she has never met. So he prays. He asks the Lord, the God of Abraham, to show kindness to his master. His proposed sign is not arbitrary. He will ask a young woman for a drink. The one who not only gives him water, but also volunteers to draw water for his camels will be the woman God has appointed for Isaac. A thirsty camel can drink a great quantity of water. Offering to water 10 camels would require repeated trips to the well and significant effort. The sign would reveal generosity, endurance, initiative, and hospitality. Before the servant finishes praying, Rebekah arrives. She is the daughter of Bethuel, who is the son of Abraham's brother Nahor and Milcah. She carries a jar on her shoulder, goes down to the spring, fills it, and comes back up. The servant runs to meet her and asks for a little water. She immediately lowers the jar and gives him a drink. Then she says, "I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink." She empties her jar into the trough and runs back to the well again and again. The servant watches in silence, wondering whether the Lord has made his journey successful. When the camels finish drinking, he gives Rebekah a gold nose ring and 2 gold bracelets. Then he asks whose daughter she is and whether her family has room for him to stay. She identifies her family and says they have both food for the camels and space for the travelers. The servant bows and worships the Lord. "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness." He had been asked to find Abraham's family, and the woman who appeared before his prayer was finished belongs to that very household. Rebekah runs home and tells her family what happened. Her brother Laban sees the jewelry and hears her account. He hurries to the well and invites the servant into their home. Food is placed before him, but the servant refuses to eat until he explains why he has come. He tells the story carefully. Abraham has become wealthy. Sarah bore a son in her old age. Abraham has given Isaac everything he owns. The servant was placed under oath to find a wife among Abraham's relatives. At the well he prayed, and Rebekah fulfilled the sign exactly. Then he asks the family to decide whether they will act with kindness and faithfulness toward Abraham. Laban and Bethuel answer that the matter has come from the Lord. Rebekah may go and become Isaac's wife. The servant bows to the ground. He brings out silver, gold jewelry, and clothing for Rebekah, along with costly gifts for her brother and mother. Only after completing the mission does he eat and drink. The next morning, the servant asks to leave immediately. Rebekah's family wants her to remain for at least several more days. But the servant does not want to delay after the Lord has made the journey successful. They decide to ask Rebekah herself, "Will you go with this man?" She answers with remarkable simplicity, "I will go." Like Abraham before her, Rebekah leaves her family and homeland for a future built upon a promise. She has not met Isaac. She does not know the landscape of Canaan, yet she chooses to go. Her family blesses her, asking that she become the mother of thousands upon thousands, and that her descendants possess the gates of their enemies. Rebekah, her attendants, and her nurse leave with Abraham's servant. Back in Canaan, Isaac is living in the Negev. One evening he goes into the field, perhaps to meditate or pray. He looks up and sees camels approaching. Rebekah also looks up and sees Isaac. She dismounts and asks the servant who the man is walking toward them. The servant answers, "He is my master." Rebekah takes her veil and covers herself. The servant tells Isaac everything he has done. Isaac brings Rebekah into the tent of his mother Sarah. He marries her, and she becomes his wife. Genesis says that Isaac loves her and is comforted after his mother's death. The covenant continues not through political alliance or conquest, but through a marriage formed by providence, courage, and trust. Abraham later takes another wife named Keturah and has additional sons. He gives gifts to the sons of his concubines and sends them eastward away from Isaac, while he gives everything he owns to Isaac. This does not mean Abraham has no concern for his other children. It clarifies which son carries the covenant inheritance. Abraham dies at the age of 175. His sons Isaac and Ishmael come together to bury him in the cave of Machpelah beside Sarah. For one brief moment, the two sons, separated in childhood, stand together at their father's grave. After Abraham's death, God blesses Isaac. Ishmael's genealogy is recorded as well. He becomes the father of 12 rulers, just as God promised. His descendants settle across a broad region, and he dies at the age of 137. Then Genesis turns fully toward Isaac. Isaac is 40 years old when he marries Rebekah, but Rebekah is unable to conceive. The same threat that once faced Abraham and Sarah now confronts the next generation. The promise has moved forward, but the obstacle has returned. Isaac prays to the Lord on behalf of his wife. The Lord answers, and Rebekah becomes pregnant. Her pregnancy is difficult. The children struggle violently within her, and she asks why this is happening. She goes to inquire of the Lord. The answer reveals that her womb contains more than 2 children. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. The struggle between the brothers begins before birth. When the time comes, the first child emerges red and covered with hair. He is named Esau. Afterward, his brother comes out, grasping Esau's heel. He is named Jacob, a name associated with the heel and later with the idea of grasping or supplanting. Isaac is 60 years old when the twins are born. He and Rebekah had waited 20 years. The boys grow into very different men. Esau becomes a skilled hunter, a man of the open country. Jacob is described as a quiet man who stays among the tents. Their parents also divide in their affections. Isaac loves Esau because he enjoys the wild game Esau brings home. Rebekah loves Jacob. This favoritism will become one of the great wounds of the family. One day, Jacob is cooking stew when Esau returns from the open country, exhausted. Esau asks for some of the red stew. Jacob sees an opportunity. "First, sell me your birthright." The birthright normally belonged to the firstborn son and carried a privileged share of the family inheritance, along with status and responsibility within the household. Esau answers as though his immediate hunger is the only reality that matters. "I am about to die. What good is the birthright to me?" Jacob makes him swear an oath. Esau sells the birthright for bread and lentil stew. He eats, drinks, rises, and leaves. Genesis concludes that Esau despised his birthright. The scene does not make Jacob admirable. He uses his brother's weakness for personal advantage. But Esau is also responsible. He treats a lasting inheritance as less valuable than immediate satisfaction. One brother manipulates, the other disregards. The promise moves through a family in which neither man yet displays the character needed to carry it well. Another famine strikes the land, though this one is distinct from the famine in Abraham's time. Isaac travels toward Gerar, where another ruler bearing the title Abimelech governs the Philistines. The Lord appears and warns Isaac not to go down to Egypt. He must remain in the land God directs him to inhabit. God repeats the promises given to Abraham, land descendants as numerous as the stars and blessing for all nations through his offspring. The promise is continuing through Isaac. He stays in Gerar, but when local men ask about Rebekah, Isaac says, "She is my sister." The failure of the father reappears in the son. Isaac fears that he will be killed because Rebekah is beautiful. For a long time, the deception remains hidden. Then Abimelech looks through a window and sees Isaac showing affection to Rebekah in a way that reveals she is his wife. The king confronts him. Isaac admits that he feared losing his life. Abimelech rebukes him for placing the people in danger and orders that no one harm Isaac or Rebekah. Once again, a man carrying the promise is corrected by a foreign ruler because fear has led him into deception. Yet God blesses Isaac in the land. He plants crops and reaps 100-fold in the same year. His wealth increases until he possesses large flocks, herds, and many servants. The Philistines envy him. They stop up the wells Abraham's servants had dug. Abimelech eventually asks Isaac to move away because he has become too powerful. Isaac does not respond by going to war. He moves into the valley of Gerar and reopens the wells from Abraham's time, giving them the same names his father had used. When Isaac's servants discover fresh water, local herders claim the well. Isaac names it Esek, meaning dispute. They dig another, and another conflict begins. He names it Sitnah, associated with opposition. Isaac moves again. This time, no one quarrels over the well. He names it Rehoboth, saying that the Lord has made room for them, and they will flourish in the land. Isaac then goes to Beersheba. That night the Lord appears and tells him not to be afraid. "I am the God of your father Abraham. I will be with you and will bless you." Isaac builds an altar, calls on the name of the Lord, pitches his tent, and his servants dig another well. Abimelech comes to him with an advisor and military commander. Isaac asks why they have come after treating him with hostility. They answer that they can clearly see the Lord is with him. They want a treaty. Isaac prepares a feast, and the men swear an oath of peace. On that same day, Isaac's servants report that they have found water. The wells, altars, and promises of Abraham now appear in Isaac's life. The son is not merely repeating his father's movements, he is receiving the covenant for himself. But trouble is growing inside his household. When Esau is 40, he marries 2 Hittite women, Judith and Basemath. Their marriages become a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Then Isaac grows old. His eyes become so weak that he can no longer see clearly. Believing that his death may be near, he calls Esau. Isaac asks his older son to take his weapons, hunt wild game, and prepare the food he loves. After eating, Isaac intends to give Esau his blessing before he dies. The birthright and the blessing are related, but they are not identical. Esau had sold his birthright to Jacob, yet Isaac still plans to confer the formal paternal blessing upon Esau. Rebekah overhears the conversation. She calls Jacob and tells him what Isaac is preparing to do. Then she forms a plan. Jacob is to bring 2 young goats. Rebekah will prepare them the way Isaac likes, and Jacob will take the food to his father so that he receives the blessing in Esau's place. Jacob immediately sees the danger. Esau is hairy, while Jacob has smooth skin. If Isaac touches him, the deception will be exposed, and Jacob fears receiving a curse instead of a blessing. Rebekah answers, "Let the curse fall on me." She commands him to obey. Jacob brings the goats. Rebekah prepares the food, dresses Jacob in Esau's best clothes, and covers his hands and neck with goat skins. Jacob enters his father's tent. "My father," Isaac answers. "Yes, my son." "Who is it?" Jacob says. "I am Esau, your firstborn." The deception is direct. He claims that he has done what Isaac requested and asks his father to eat so that he may receive the blessing. Isaac is suspicious. "How did you find it so quickly?" Jacob answers by bringing God into the lie. "The Lord your God gave me success." Isaac asks him to come closer so he can determine whether this is truly Esau. He touches Jacob's hands. The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. Isaac asks again, "Are you really my son, Esau?" Jacob says, "I am." Isaac eats the food and drinks the wine. Then he asks Jacob to come near and kiss him. When Isaac smells Esau's clothing, his uncertainty gives way. He blesses Jacob with the dew of heaven, the richness of the earth, abundant grain and wine. He declares that nations will serve him and peoples will bow down to him. He gives him authority over his brothers and repeats the covenant pattern: those who curse him will be cursed, and those who bless him will be blessed. Jacob leaves. Almost immediately, Esau returns. He prepares the food and enters his father's tent. Isaac asks who he is. "I am your son, your firstborn, Esau." Isaac trembles violently. He realizes that another son has already brought food and received the blessing, and indeed he will be blessed. The spoken blessing cannot simply be treated as though it never happened. In the world of Genesis, such words carry legal, familial, and prophetic weight. When Esau hears this, he cries out with a loud and bitter cry, "Bless me too!" My father Isaac explains that Jacob came deceitfully and took the blessing. Esau connects the act to Jacob's name. He says Jacob has now supplanted him twice, first taking the birthright, then the blessing. Yet Esau had willingly sold the birthright. The present deception does not erase his earlier contempt. The family's disaster has been built through many choices. Esau disregarded his inheritance. Jacob exploited him. Isaac tried to advance Esau despite the divine word given before the twins were born. Rebekah used deception to secure what she believed God had promised. Jacob lied repeatedly. Every member of the household has contributed to the fracture. Esau begs for any remaining blessing. Isaac tells him that his dwelling will be away from the earth's richness and the dew of heaven. He will live by the sword and serve his brother, though a time will come when he throws off that yoke. Esau begins to hate Jacob. He decides that after the days of mourning for Isaac, he will kill his brother. The violence of Cain and Abel threatens to return within the covenant family. Rebekah learns of Esau's plan and tells Jacob to flee to her brother Laban in Haran. She expects Jacob to remain there only until Esau's anger subsides. "Why should I lose both of you in one day?" Rebekah then speaks to Isaac about her distress over Esau's Hittite wives. She argues that if Jacob also marries a Canaanite woman, her life will not be worth living. Isaac calls Jacob. He blesses him openly and instructs him not to marry a Canaanite woman. Jacob must go to Paddan Aram, to the household of Rebekah's father, and marry one of Laban's daughters. Isaac invokes God Almighty and asks that Jacob receive the blessing of Abraham, fruitfulness, many descendants, and possession of the land where he has lived as a foreigner. This time Jacob receives the covenant blessing without disguise. But he receives it while being sent away from the land. He has gained the blessing and lost his home. Esau sees that his Canaanite wives displease his parents. He goes to Ishmael's family and marries Mahalath, one of Ishmael's daughters, in addition to the wives he already has. Jacob leaves Beersheba and begins the long journey toward Haran. He travels alone. The man who wanted the firstborn's position now has none of the visible advantages of the firstborn. He carries no estate, no flocks, and no household. He has only the blessing, the consequences of his deception, and an uncertain road. When the sun sets, Jacob stops for the night. He takes one of the stones from the place, puts it near his head, and lies down on the ground. Then he dreams. He sees a stairway or ramp resting on the earth, with its top reaching toward heaven. Angels of God ascend and descend upon it. Above it stands the Lord. The God of Abraham and Isaac speaks directly to Jacob. The land upon which he lies will be given to him and his descendants. His offspring will become like the dust of the earth and spread west, east, north, and south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through Jacob and his offspring. Then comes the promise the fugitive most needs to hear. "I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land." Jacob has been forced from his family, but he has not been driven beyond God's reach. When he wakes, he is afraid. "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." He calls the place Awesome, the house of God and the gate of heaven. Early in the morning, Jacob takes the stone and sets it upright as a pillar. He pours oil upon it and names the place Bethel, meaning house of God. Then Jacob makes a vow. If God remains with him, protects him, provides food and clothing, and brings him safely back to his father's household, then the Lord will be his God. The stone will become God's house, and Jacob will give God 1/10 of everything he receives. His words reveal both faith and immaturity. He's encountered God, but he still speaks conditionally. He's beginning to trust, yet he has not fully surrendered his instinct to bargain, calculate, and secure his own future. Jacob continues eastward. Ahead of him is the household of Laban, the brother of Rebekah. Jacob, who deceived his father while wearing another man's clothes, is about to enter the home of someone even more skilled in manipulation. He will fall in love, labor for years, be deceived on his wedding night, and watch his family grow through rivalry and pain. The man who grasped for the blessing must now be reshaped before he can return to the land as Israel. Jacob continued eastward until he reached the land of the eastern peoples. Near a well, he saw shepherds gathered with their flocks. A large stone covered the opening, and according to local custom, the shepherds waited until all the flocks arrived before rolling it away. Jacob asked whether they knew Laban, the son of Nahor. They did. Then they pointed toward a young woman approaching with sheep. There comes his daughter Rachel. Rachel was a shepherdess tending her father's flock. When Jacob saw her, he rolled the heavy stone away from the well and watered Laban's sheep. Then he kissed Rachel and began to weep. The long journey had ended. The fugitive from Beersheba had found his mother's family. Jacob told Rachel that he was Rebekah's son. She ran home with the news, and Laban hurried to meet him. He embraced Jacob, brought him into his house, and listened as Jacob explained what had happened. Laban said, "You are my own flesh and blood." Jacob stayed with him for a month. Then Laban asked what wages Jacob should receive for his labor. Laban had 2 daughters. The older was Leah, and the younger was Rachel. Genesis describes Rachel as beautiful in form and appearance, while its description of Leah's eyes has been translated and interpreted in different ways. Whatever the precise meaning, the story makes clear that Jacob loved Rachel. He offered to work for Laban for 7 years in exchange for marrying her. Laban agreed. The years seemed like only a few days to Jacob because of his love for Rachel. For the first time in Jacob's story, he appears willing to wait rather than seize. He works year after year for the woman he hopes to marry. When the 7 years are complete, Jacob asks Laban to honor the agreement. Laban gathers the people of the region and holds a wedding feast. But that evening, under the covering of darkness and wedding customs, he brings Leah to Jacob instead of Rachel. Jacob does not discover the deception until morning. The man who entered his father's tent, disguised as his older brother, awakens beside the older sister he did not expect. He confronts Laban. "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban answers that local custom does not permit the younger daughter to marry before the firstborn. The language reaches directly into Jacob's past. Jacob, the younger son, who took the position of the firstborn, is now defeated by an appeal to the rights of the older child. Laban offers Rachel as well, but only if Jacob completes Leah's wedding week and agrees to work another 7 years. Jacob accepts. He marries Rachel, but Genesis says he loves Rachel more than Leah. The household begins with rivalry already built into its structure. Leah is married but unloved. Rachel is loved but unable to conceive. When the Lord sees that Leah is not loved, he enables her to bear children. Her first son is Reuben. Leah hopes that because the Lord has seen her misery, her husband will now love her. Then she gives birth to Simeon, saying that the Lord heard she was unloved. Her third son is Levi. She hopes that after bearing 3 sons, Jacob will finally become attached to her. With each name, Leah's pain becomes audible. She is producing heirs for Jacob, yet she still longs for the affection given to her sister. When her 4th son is born, something changes. She names him Judah and says, "This time I will praise the Lord." The longing for Jacob's love has not disappeared, but her words turn away from bargaining for human approval and toward praise. Then she stops bearing children for a time. Rachel watches her sister give Jacob 4 sons while she remains childless. Her grief turns into jealousy. She tells Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." Jacob becomes angry. "Am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children?" His answer is theologically correct but emotionally harsh. Rachel's pain is real, but Jacob cannot give life by command. Rachel follows a pattern already seen in Sarah's story. She gives her servant Bilhah to Jacob so that children born through Bilhah may be counted within Rachel's household. Bilhah gives birth to Dan. Rachel declares that God has vindicated her. Then Bilhah bears Naphtali, and Rachel describes her struggle with Leah as a great wrestling match. When Leah sees that she has stopped bearing children, she gives her servant Zilpah to Jacob. Zilpah gives birth to Gad and Asher. The competition between the sisters continues through their servants, their sons, and their interpretations of every birth. One day, Reuben finds mandrakes in the fields and brings them to Leah. In the ancient world, mandrakes were associated with fertility. Rachel asks Leah for some. Leah responds bitterly, "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" The two sisters negotiate. Rachel allows Jacob to spend the night with Leah in exchange for the mandrakes. Leah conceives again and bears Issachar, followed by Zebulun. Later she gives birth to a daughter named Dinah. Then Genesis says that God remembers Rachel. As with Noah, divine remembrance means that God acts toward the person in need. Rachel becomes pregnant and gives birth to Joseph. She says that God has removed her disgrace, and she names the child with a prayer that the Lord will add another son. By this point, Jacob's household has grown into the beginnings of a nation. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Dinah, and Joseph have been born. But this is not a peaceful family gathered around a single promise. It is a household shaped by two sisters competing for one husband, children linked to their mother's wounds, and a father whose unequal love will eventually pass from his wives to his sons. After Joseph's birth, Jacob asks Laban for permission to return to his homeland. Laban does not want him to leave. He has recognized through experience or divination that the Lord has blessed him because of Jacob. He asks Jacob to name his wages. Jacob reminds Laban how greatly his flocks have increased during Jacob's service. Before Jacob arrived, Laban had little. Now his possessions have multiplied. Jacob proposes an unusual arrangement. He will continue tending the flocks, but the speckled, spotted, and dark-colored animals will become his wages. Laban agrees, but immediately attempts to remove Jacob's future payment. He separates the animals matching those descriptions and places them under the care of his sons, several days' journey away. Jacob is once again dealing with a man who uses agreements for his own advantage. The breeding methods Jacob employs involve peeled branches placed before the animals at watering troughs. The text describes what Jacob does, but later Jacob himself explains that his increase ultimately came because God saw how Laban treated him. Jacob selectively breeds stronger animals for his own flocks and leaves weaker ones for Laban. Over time, Jacob becomes exceedingly prosperous. He possesses large flocks, servants, camels, and donkeys. Laban's sons begin to accuse Jacob of taking what belonged to their father. Laban's attitude toward him changes. Then the Lord speaks, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." The promise given at Bethel is moving toward fulfillment. Jacob calls Rachel and Leah into the fields away from Laban's household and explains that their father no longer treats him as before. Laban has repeatedly changed Jacob's wages, but God has not allowed him to cause lasting harm. Jacob recounts a dream in which God showed that the growth of his flocks was not hidden from divine sight. Then God identified himself as the God of Bethel, where Jacob had anointed the pillar and made his vow. The message is direct. Leave this land and return to your homeland. Rachel and Leah agree. Their loyalty has shifted away from their father. They say that Laban has treated them as foreigners and consumed the wealth that should have belonged to them. Jacob prepares to leave secretly. He places his children and wives on camels and drives his livestock ahead toward Canaan. While Laban is away shearing sheep, Rachel steals her father's household gods. Genesis does not explain her full motive. The objects may have carried religious, familial, or inheritance significance. Whatever the reason, their removal creates another hidden danger. Jacob crosses the Euphrates and heads toward the hill country of Gilead. 3 days later, Laban learns that Jacob has fled. He gathers his relatives and pursues him for 7 days. But God comes to Laban in a dream and warns him not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad, a warning against interfering with Jacob's departure. When Laban catches up, he demands to know why Jacob left secretly and took his daughters away as though they were captives. He claims that he would have sent them away with music and celebration. He accuses Jacob of denying him the chance to kiss his daughters and grandchildren goodbye. Then Laban asks why his gods have been stolen. Jacob answers that he left secretly because he feared Laban would take Rachel and Leah from him by force. But Jacob knows nothing about the household gods. He declares that whoever possesses them will not live. The words are dangerously absolute. Laban searches the tents of Jacob, Leah, the servants, and finally Rachel. Rachel has hidden the objects inside a camel saddle and is sitting upon them. She tells her father she cannot rise because she is experiencing her monthly period. Laban searches but finds nothing. The scene carries deliberate humiliation. The gods Laban believes powerful enough to protect his household are hidden beneath his daughter, while she excuses herself using ritual uncleanness. Jacob, believing himself falsely accused, erupts in anger. For 20 years he has served Laban, 14 years for the daughters and 6 years for the flocks. He has endured heat by day, cold by night, and sleeplessness. He has absorbed losses and guarded the animals. Laban has changed his wages again and again. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, Jacob says, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. Jacob recognizes what his own strategies cannot fully explain. God saw his hardship. God saw the work of his hands. And God rebuked Laban. Laban continues claiming the daughter's children and flocks as his own, but he cannot stop them from leaving. So he proposes a covenant. Jacob sets up a stone pillar, and the relatives gather stones into a heap. They eat beside it, and the place becomes a boundary marker. Laban declares that the Lord will watch between them when they are apart. The words are sometimes treated as a warm blessing, but within the story, they function more like mutual suspicion. Laban warns Jacob not to mistreat his daughters or marry additional wives. Both men call upon God as witness. They agree not to cross the boundary with hostile intent. The next morning, Laban kisses his grandchildren and daughters, blesses them, and returns home. Jacob continues toward Canaan. Then angels of God meet him. He names the place Mahanaim, meaning 2 camps. At Bethel, angels appeared as Jacob left the land. Now they appear again as he returns. But between Jacob and his home stands Esau. Years earlier, Esau intended to kill him. Jacob does not know whether time has changed his brother's heart. He sends messengers ahead with a carefully humble message. He refers to Esau as my lord and to himself as your servant. He reports that he has livestock and servants and seeks favor in Esau's eyes. The messengers return with alarming news. Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men. Jacob becomes greatly afraid and distressed. He divides his household flocks, herds, and camels into 2 groups, reasoning that if Esau attacks one camp, the other may escape. Then Jacob prays. This is one of the most vulnerable prayers of his life. He addresses the God of Abraham and Isaac, the Lord who commanded him to return. He confesses that he is unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness shown to him. When he first crossed the Jordan, he had only his staff. Now he has become 2 camps. He asks God to save him from Esau because he fears that his brother will attack him, the mothers and the children. Then Jacob reminds God of the promise that his descendants will become as numerous as the sand of the sea. Jacob prepares an enormous gift for Esau: goats, sheep, camels, cattle, and donkeys. He separates them into groups and sends them ahead, one after another. Each servant is instructed to tell Esau that the animals belong to his servant Jacob and are a gift to his lord. Jacob hopes to pacify his brother before seeing him face to face. The word he uses carries the idea of covering or appeasing. Jacob is attempting to address the wrong he committed years earlier through restitution, humility, and preparation. That night, he sends his wives servants and 11 sons across the Jabbok River with all his possessions. Then Jacob is left alone. A man wrestles with him until daybreak. Genesis does not initially identify the stranger. The struggle is physical, prolonged, and mysterious. When the man sees that Jacob will not yield, he touches Jacob's hip socket and dislocates it. Still, Jacob holds on. The man tells him to let go because dawn is breaking. Jacob answers, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asks his name, Jacob. The question forces him to speak the identity he has carried all his life, the heel grasper, the man associated with struggle and supplanting. Then the stranger declares, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." The meaning of Israel is associated with struggling or contending with God. Jacob asks the man's name, but receives no direct answer. Instead, he is blessed. Jacob names the place Peniel, saying that he saw God face to face, and yet his life was spared. The sun rises as he passes the place. Jacob is limping because of his hip. He entered the night depending upon plans, gifts, divided camps, and escape routes. He leaves the encounter blessed, but wounded. The man who spent his life grasping finally receives blessing, not by deception, disguise, or manipulation, but by clinging helplessly to God. Jacob looks up and sees Esau approaching with 400 men. He arranges the family according to the hierarchy that still governs his affections: the servants and their children first, Leah and her children next, Rachel and Joseph last. Then Jacob moves ahead of everyone. Years earlier, he fled, while others absorbed the consequences. Now he places himself in front. He bows to the ground 7 times as he approaches Esau. But Esau does not draw a sword. He runs toward Jacob, embraces him, throws his arms around his neck, and kisses him. The brothers weep. The confrontation Jacob feared does not become another Cain and Abel. Esau sees the women and children and asks who they are. Jacob introduces them as the children God has graciously given him. The family bows before Esau. Esau asks about the herds Jacob sent ahead. Jacob explains that they were intended to gain Esau's favor. Esau initially refuses. "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have." Jacob urges him to accept. "To see your face is like seeing the face of God now that you have received me favorably." After wrestling through the night and fearing judgment from his brother, Jacob experiences mercy in the face he expected to hate him. Esau accepts the gift. He offers to accompany Jacob, but Jacob declines, explaining that the children and animals cannot move quickly. Esau offers to leave some men behind, but Jacob refuses that as well. Esau returns to Seir. Jacob travels to Succoth, where he builds a place for himself and shelters for his livestock. Later he arrives safely near the city of Shechem in Canaan. He purchases a plot of land and sets up an altar called El Elohe Israel, God the God of Israel. He has returned to the promised land, but he has not yet returned to Bethel, where he made his vow. And the family he brings into Canaan carries unresolved violence within it. Dinah, the daughter of Leah and Jacob, goes out to visit the women of the land. Shechem, the son of Hamor and a prince of the region, sees her and violates her. The text then says he is deeply drawn to Dinah and wants to marry her. He speaks tenderly to her and asks his father to obtain her as his wife, but later affection cannot undo the violence. Jacob hears what happened, but remains silent until his sons return from the fields. When they learn of Dinah's violation, they are filled with grief and fury. Hamor approaches Jacob and proposes a marriage alliance. The families can intermarry, settle together, trade, and acquire property. Shechem offers to pay any bride price demanded. Jacob's sons answer deceitfully. They say they cannot give their sister to an uncircumcised man. They will agree only if every male in the city is circumcised. Hamor and Shechem accept the condition and persuade the men of the city by emphasizing the economic advantages of joining with Jacob's family. Every male is circumcised. On the third day, while the men are in pain, Simeon and Levi take swords and attack the unsuspecting city. They kill every male, including Hamor and Shechem, and take Dinah from Shechem's house. The other sons then plunder the city, seizing livestock, wealth, women, and children. The response to one act of violence has become collective slaughter. Jacob condemns Simeon and Levi, but his first recorded concern is that their actions have made him repulsive to the Canaanites and Perizzites. He fears that the surrounding peoples will unite and destroy his household. The brothers answer, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" The chapter ends without an easy resolution. Dinah's voice is not recorded. Shechem's crime remains evil. The revenge of Simeon and Levi is not presented as justice. Jacob's silence and fear remain exposed. The family of promise has returned to Canaan, but its sons have brought bloodshed into the land. Then God commands Jacob, "Go up to Bethel and settle there, and build an altar to God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau." Before they go, Jacob tells his household to remove the foreign gods among them, purify themselves, and change their clothes. They give him the foreign gods and the rings from their ears. Jacob buries them beneath a tree near Shechem. The household must leave behind the divided loyalties carried from Laban's world and from the peoples around them. As they travel, the terror of God falls upon the surrounding towns, and no one pursues them. Jacob reaches Bethel and builds an altar. There God appears again and confirms the new name. "You are Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel." God identifies himself as God Almighty and repeats the promises of fruitfulness, nations, kings, and land. Jacob sets up a stone pillar, pours out a drink offering, and anoints it with oil. The vow made by a frightened fugitive has now reached its place of fulfillment. God watched over him. God provided for him. God brought him back. But the journey is still marked by death. Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, dies and is buried near Bethel. Her presence suggests a link to Jacob's mother, though Genesis does not tell us when Deborah joined his household. Then Rachel goes into labor while the family is traveling from Bethel. The labor is severe. As she is dying, she names the child Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow. Jacob renames him Benjamin, commonly understood as son of my right hand. Rachel dies and is buried on the road to Ephrath, later known as Bethlehem. The woman Jacob loved and served 14 years to marry dies, giving birth to the son she had long desired. Jacob sets up a pillar over her grave. The family now has 12 sons, but the household has lost Rachel. Soon afterward, Reuben sleeps with Bilhah, Rachel's servant and Jacob's concubine. The act is more than sexual betrayal. Within the ancient household, it may represent a challenge to his father's authority and an attempt to claim status. Genesis records only that Israel hears about it. The full consequence will emerge later, when Jacob speaks his final words over his sons. Finally, Jacob returns to his father Isaac at Mamre, near Hebron. Isaac dies at the age of 180, old and full of years. Esau and Jacob bury him. Once again, the brothers stand together at their father's grave. Genesis then records the descendants of Esau, also called Edom. His family grows into clans, chiefs, and kings in the hill country of Seir. God's promise to make nations from Abraham's family is unfolding beyond the covenant line as well. Jacob remains in Canaan, the land where his father had lived as a foreigner. He has 12 sons, but among them, one child occupies a special place in his heart. Joseph is the son of Rachel, born after years of waiting. Jacob loves him more than his other sons and gives him a distinctive robe. The favoritism that once divided Isaac's household is beginning again. And when Joseph starts speaking about dreams in which his brothers bow before him, the jealousy inside Jacob's family will move toward a betrayal that changes the future of every son of Israel. Jacob had returned to the land promised to Abraham and Isaac, but peace had not returned to his household. He loved Joseph more than his other sons because Joseph was the child of his old age and the first son born to Rachel after years of barrenness. Jacob gave him a distinctive robe, a visible sign that Joseph occupied a special place in his father's affection. The robe did more than express love. In a family already shaped by rivalry, it announced favoritism. Joseph's brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, and they hated him. They could not speak peacefully to him. Then Joseph began to dream. In the first dream, he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in a field. Joseph's sheaf stood upright, while the sheaves belonging to his brothers gathered around and bowed down to it. When he told them, they immediately understood the implication. "Do you intend to reign over us?" Their hatred increased. Joseph then dreamed that the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed before him. He told the dream to his father and brothers. Jacob rebuked him. Would Joseph's father, mother, and brothers truly bow to the ground before him? Rachel had already died, making the exact imagery difficult to interpret literally. The dream spoke symbolically of Joseph's elevation within the family, though. Neither Joseph nor his listeners could yet understand how it would happen. His brothers became jealous. Jacob kept the matter in mind. The family's flocks were grazing near Shechem, the region where Simeon and Levi had once destroyed a city. Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers and bring back a report. Joseph traveled from the valley of Hebron toward Shechem. When he could not find them, a man directed him to Dothan. His brothers saw him approaching from a distance. Before Joseph reached them, they began planning his death. Here comes that dreamer. They proposed killing him, throwing his body into a cistern and claiming that a wild animal had devoured him. Then they spoke words that revealed what they believed they were attacking. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Their hatred was directed not only toward Joseph's behavior or their father's favoritism. They wanted to destroy the future his dreams represented. Reuben the firstborn intervened. He persuaded them not to shed Joseph's blood directly. Instead, they should throw him alive into an empty cistern in the wilderness. Reuben secretly intended to rescue Joseph and return him to Jacob. When Joseph arrived, the brothers stripped off the robe their father had given him and threw him into the cistern. The pit was empty. There was no water. Joseph was alive below them. The brothers sat down to eat. While Joseph remained trapped, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites or Midianite traders traveling from Gilead toward Egypt, carrying spices, balm, and myrrh. Judah proposed a different plan. What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Instead, they could sell him. He was still their brother, their own flesh. The argument sounds merciful, but it replaces murder with human trafficking. Joseph's life will be spared only so that profit can be made from him. The brothers agree. Joseph is pulled from the cistern and sold for 20 shekels of silver. The traders take him toward Egypt. When Reuben returns and discovers that Joseph is gone, he tears his clothes in grief. His private intention to rescue Joseph has failed, But rather than confess to Jacob, the brothers create a deception. They slaughter a goat, dip Joseph's robe in its blood, and bring it to their father. They do not directly say Joseph is dead. They ask Jacob to identify the garment. Jacob recognizes it immediately. "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him." Years earlier, Jacob used a goat and his brother's clothing to deceive his blind father. Now his sons use a goat and Joseph's clothing to deceive him. Jacob tears his garments, puts on sackcloth, and mourns for many days. His sons and daughters attempt to comfort him, but he refuses. "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." The brothers must now live beside the grief they created. Meanwhile, Joseph arrives in Egypt and is sold to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials and captain of the guard. Genesis briefly turns away from Joseph to Judah. The placement of this account is not accidental. While Joseph is taken from his family into slavery, Judah separates himself from his brothers and becomes involved in a crisis that will expose his own character. Judah marries a Canaanite woman and has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. His oldest son, marries a woman named Tamar, but is wicked in the Lord's sight and dies. According to the family responsibility later formalized in Israelite law, Onan is expected to produce offspring for his dead brother through Tamar, but Onan knows that the child will not be counted as his own heir. He deliberately prevents conception while continuing to use Tamar for his benefit. His actions are condemned, and he also dies. Judah fears that his youngest son Shelah may die as well. He tells Tamar to remain a widow in her father's house until Shelah grows up, but he does not intend to fulfill the promise. Tamar is left without a husband-child or secure future. Years pass. Judah's wife dies. After his period of mourning, Judah travels toward Timnah for the shearing of his sheep. Tamar learns that Shelah has grown, yet she has not been given to him. She removes her widow's garments, covers herself with a veil, and sits near the road. Judah sees her, but does not recognize her. Believing she is a prostitute, he approaches her and promises a young goat as payment. Tamar asks for a pledge until the payment arrives. Judah gives her his seal cord and staff, objects that identify him personally and publicly. Tamar becomes pregnant. About 3 months later, Judah is told that Tamar has acted immorally and is expecting a child. His response is severe. "Bring her out and have her burned." As she is brought out, Tamar sends Judah the identifying objects. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these." Judah recognizes them. "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." Tamar gives birth to twins, Perez and Zerah. During the birth, one child extends his hand and receives a scarlet thread, but he pulls it back and Perez emerges first. Once again in Genesis, the expected order of birth is overturned. Perez will become especially important in the biblical genealogy, eventually standing in the ancestral line of David and in the New Testament, Jesus. The story does not present deception or sexual disorder as ideal. It reveals how Judah's injustice placed Tamar in danger and how she acted to secure the family obligation he refused to fulfill. Judah, who suggested selling Joseph, is beginning to confront the consequences of his own character. The narrative then returns to Egypt. Joseph is a slave in Potiphar's house, but the Lord is with him. That repeated statement becomes the center of Joseph's story. Joseph has lost his robe family freedom and place in the Promised Land, yet he has not lost the presence of God. Potiphar notices that Joseph succeeds in everything he does. He places Joseph in charge of his household and entrusts all his possessions to him. The Lord blesses Potiphar's house because of Joseph. Joseph rises from an enslaved foreigner to the chief administrator of an Egyptian official's estate. But his success creates another danger. Joseph is well built and handsome.
Potiphar's wife repeatedly asks him to sleep with her. Joseph refuses. He explains that Potiphar has trusted him with everything except his wife. To betray that trust would be both a wrong against Potiphar and a sin against God. Day after day she pressures him. Day after day he refuses. One day Joseph enters the house to perform his duties, and none of the other servants are present. Potiphar's wife grabs his garment and again demands that he sleep with her. Joseph leaves the garment in her hand and runs out of the house. His integrity preserves him from one sin, but does not protect him from accusation. Potiphar's wife calls the household servants and claims that Joseph attempted to violate her. She uses the abandoned garment as evidence. When Potiphar returns, she repeats the accusation. Joseph is placed in the prison where Pharaoh's prisoners are confined. Once again, a garment is used to destroy his position. His brothers used the robe to make Jacob believe Joseph was dead. Potiphar's wife uses another garment to make her husband believe Joseph is guilty. Joseph moves from favored son to slave, then from trusted servant to prisoner. But the Lord is with him in prison. God shows him steadfast love and grants him favor with the prison warden. Soon Joseph is placed in charge of the other prisoners and everything done there. The warden pays little attention to the matters under Joseph's authority because the Lord gives Joseph success. Then, two high-ranking officials offend Pharaoh, the chief cupbearer, and the chief baker. They are placed in the prison under Joseph's care. One morning, Joseph notices that both men are troubled. They have each experienced a dream, but have no one to interpret it. Joseph answers, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer describes a vine with 3 branches. It buds, blossoms, and produces ripe grapes. He squeezes the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and places it in the king's hand. Joseph explains that the 3 branches represent 3 days. Within that time, Pharaoh will restore the cupbearer to his position. Joseph then asks him for one act of kindness. When the cupbearer returns to the palace, he must remember Joseph and mention him to Pharaoh. Joseph explains that he was forcibly taken from the land of the Hebrews and has done nothing deserving imprisonment. The baker, encouraged by the favorable interpretation, tells his dream. 3 baskets of bread are on his head, but birds eat the food from the upper basket. Joseph explains that within 3 days, Pharaoh will execute the baker, and birds will eat his flesh. 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, both interpretations are fulfilled. The cupbearer is restored. The baker is executed. But the cupbearer forgets Joseph. 2 full years pass. Joseph remains in prison, while the man who could speak for him serves Pharaoh. The delay is not measured in days, but years. Then Pharaoh dreams. He stands beside the Nile as 7 healthy, well-fed cows emerge from the river and graze among the reeds. After them come 7 thin and ugly cows. The thin cows devour the healthy ones, but remain as thin as before. Pharaoh awakens, then falls asleep and dreams again. 7 healthy heads of grain grow on one stalk. Then 7 thin heads, scorched by the east wind, appear and swallow the healthy grain. In the morning, Pharaoh is deeply troubled. He summons Egypt's magicians and wise men, but no one can interpret the dreams. At last, the cupbearer remembers. He tells Pharaoh about the Hebrew prisoner who correctly interpreted the dreams of both officials. Joseph is quickly brought from the prison. He shaves, changes his clothes, and stands before Pharaoh. The king says he has heard that Joseph can interpret dreams. Joseph immediately corrects the assumption. I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Joseph does not deny the gift. He identifies its source. Pharaoh recounts the dreams. Joseph explains that the 2 dreams carry one message. God has revealed what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout Egypt. After them will come 7 years of famine so severe that the previous abundance will be forgotten. The repetition of the dream means the matter has been firmly decided and will happen soon. Joseph then moves beyond interpretation. He advises Pharaoh to appoint a discerning and wise man over Egypt. During the 7 abundant years, officials should collect 1/5 of the harvest and store grain in cities under Pharaoh's authority. The reserve will preserve the country during the famine. Pharaoh asks his officials whether they can find anyone like Joseph, a man in whom is the Spirit of God. Then he turns to Joseph. Since God has revealed these things to him, no one is as discerning and wise. Joseph will be placed over Pharaoh's household and all Egypt. Only Pharaoh himself will rank above him. The king removes his signet ring and places it on Joseph's hand. He dresses Joseph in fine linen and places a gold chain around his neck. Joseph rides in Pharaoh's second chariot while people call for others to bow before him. In a single day, the forgotten prisoner becomes governor of Egypt. Pharaoh gives him an Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah, and an Egyptian wife named Asenath, daughter of a priest of On. Joseph is 30 years old. 13 years have passed since the 17-year-old was sold by his brothers. Joseph travels throughout Egypt and organizes the collection of grain. The earth produces abundantly during the 7 years, and the stored grain becomes so vast that record-keeping eventually stops because it cannot be measured. Before the famine begins, Joseph has 2 sons. He names the first Manasseh, saying that God has made him forget or move beyond all his trouble and his father's household. He names the second Ephraim, saying that God has made him fruitful in the land of his suffering. Joseph has not literally forgotten his family. The names reveal that God has enabled him to live and bear fruit without being destroyed by grief. Then the 7 years of abundance end. The famine begins. It reaches beyond Egypt into surrounding lands, but Egypt has food because of the preparation Joseph directed. When the people cry to Pharaoh, he tells them, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." Joseph opens the storehouses and sells grain. People from many countries come to Egypt because the famine is severe throughout the region. In Canaan, Jacob learns that Egypt has grain. He asks his sons why they are merely looking at one another while the household faces hunger. He sends 10 of them to Egypt to purchase food. Benjamin remains behind. Jacob refuses to risk Rachel's only remaining son because he fears harm may come to him. The favoritism remains. The brothers travel to Egypt and come before the governor responsible for selling grain. They bow with their faces to the ground. Joseph recognizes them. They do not recognize him. He is older, dressed as an Egyptian ruler, speaking through an interpreter, and known by an Egyptian name. The dream from Joseph's youth is being fulfilled. But Joseph does not reveal himself. He speaks harshly and accuses them of being spies who have come to discover where Egypt is vulnerable. The brothers deny the accusation. They explain that they are 12 sons of one man in Canaan. The youngest remains with their father, and one brother is no more. Joseph hears them describe his disappearance as though it were simply a family tragedy. He demands proof. One brother must return to Canaan and bring Benjamin, while the others remain confined. Joseph places them all in custody for 3 days. On the 3rd day, he alters the arrangement. Because he fears God, only one brother will remain imprisoned. The others may carry grain home, but they must return with Benjamin. The brothers begin speaking among themselves, unaware that Joseph understands every word. They connect their present distress to what they did years earlier. Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. For the first time, Genesis reveals that Joseph begged them from the cistern or while being sold. Reuben reminds them that he warned them not to sin against the boy. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." Joseph turns away and weeps. He has heard regret, but he does not yet know whether it represents genuine transformation or only fear. He returns, selects Simeon, and has him bound before their eyes. Joseph orders that their sacks be filled with grain, that each man's silver be secretly returned, and that they receive provisions for the journey. As the brothers travel home, one opens his sack and discovers the silver. Their hearts sink. "What is this that God has done to us?" When they reach Jacob, they explain everything. The Egyptian ruler accused them of spying, detained Simeon, and demanded that Benjamin be brought as proof of their honesty. Then each brother opens his sack. Every man's silver is there. Jacob is terrified. He believes Joseph is gone, Simeon is gone, and now they want to take Benjamin. "Everything is against me." Reuben offers the lives of his own 2 sons as a guarantee that he will return Benjamin, but Jacob refuses. "My son will not go down there with you." Benjamin, Jacob says, is the only surviving son of Rachel. If harm comes to him, Jacob will die in grief. The famine continues. The grain will not last forever. Simeon remains imprisoned in Egypt. Joseph waits behind the authority of Pharaoh, holding power over the brothers who once held power over him. But before he can reveal who he is, one question must be answered. When the family is forced to choose between its own safety and the life of Rachel's younger son, will the brothers abandon Benjamin as they abandoned Joseph? Or will one of them finally step forward and offer himself in his brother's place? The grain brought from Egypt delayed the crisis, but it did not end it. The famine remained severe throughout Canaan. Eventually, the food purchased from Egypt was consumed, and Jacob told his sons to return and buy more. Judah reminded his father that the Egyptian governor had spoken clearly. They would not be received again unless Benjamin came with them. Jacob asked why they had caused him such trouble by telling the man they had another brother. The sons explained that the governor had questioned them closely about their family. Was their father still alive? Did they have another brother? They had answered without knowing that he would demand Benjamin's presence. Then Judah stepped forward. He asked Jacob to place Benjamin under his personal responsibility. If Judah failed to bring him back, he would bear the blame for the rest of his life. This was not the Judah who once suggested selling Joseph for silver. Years earlier, he had watched his father collapse in grief and then continued living with the deception. Now he was willing to bind his own future to the safety of Rachel's remaining son. Jacob finally agreed. He instructed them to carry some of Canaan's finest products as a gift balm: honey, spices, myrrh, pistachios, and almonds. They were also to return the silver found in their sacks and take additional money to purchase more food. Then Jacob prayed that God Almighty would grant them mercy before the Egyptian ruler so that Simeon and Benjamin might return. His final words revealed his fear. "As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." The brothers traveled to Egypt with Benjamin. When Joseph saw his younger brother among them, he instructed the manager of his household to bring the men to his residence and prepare a meal. The brothers were afraid when they learned they were being taken into Joseph's house. They assumed they were about to be accused of stealing the silver and then seized as slaves. Before entering, they approached the household manager and explained everything. They had discovered the silver only after leaving Egypt. Now they had brought it back, along with more money. The manager told them not to be afraid. "Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks." Then Simeon was released. The brothers were given water to wash their feet, and their animals were fed. They prepared their gifts and waited for the governor. When Joseph arrived, they bowed to the ground. Again, the dreams were being fulfilled. Joseph asked about their father. "Is your aged father still alive?" They answered that he was alive and well, and they bowed again. Then Joseph saw Benjamin, the son of his own mother.
"Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" He blessed Benjamin, but emotion overwhelmed him. Joseph hurried from the room and found a private place to weep. After washing his face, he returned and ordered that the meal be served. Joseph ate separately, the Egyptian officials ate separately, and the brothers were seated at another table. Egyptians would not normally eat with Hebrews because such a meal was considered unacceptable within their customs. The brothers were arranged from the oldest to the youngest. They looked at one another in astonishment. Joseph sent portions from his own table, but Benjamin received 5 times as much as the others. The test was deliberate. Years earlier, the brothers hated Joseph because their father favored him. Now another son of Rachel was being publicly distinguished above them. Would jealousy appear again? Genesis records no protest. The brothers ate and drank freely with Joseph. But Joseph had not yet completed the test. He instructed his household manager to fill their sacks with as much grain as they could carry, return each man silver, and place Joseph's silver cup inside Benjamin's sack. At dawn, the brothers began their journey home. They had not gone far when Joseph sent the manager after them. He accused them of repaying good with evil and stealing the cup Joseph used for drinking and divination. The reference reflects Joseph's public identity within the Egyptian court. The story does not depend upon him actually needing divination to know where the cup was. The brothers denied the accusation with confidence. They had returned the silver found in their sacks. Why would they steal silver or gold from Joseph's house? They declared that whoever possessed the cup should die and that the rest would become slaves. The manager reduced the penalty. Only the person found with the cup would become a slave. The others would be free. Each brother quickly lowered his sack. The search began with the oldest and moved toward the youngest. The cup was found in Benjamin's sack. The brothers tore their clothes. At the cistern years earlier, they had stripped Joseph's robe and then returned home without him. Now, when Benjamin appeared, lost, every brother returned to the city with him. They entered Joseph's house and fell before him. Joseph asked how they could have committed such an act. Judah answered, he did not attempt to prove Benjamin guilty or innocent. He said that God had uncovered the guilt of the brothers and offered all of them as Joseph's slaves. Their words reached beyond the cup. The hidden crime against Joseph still lived in their consciences. But Joseph said that only the man who possessed the cup would remain. The others could return to their father in peace. This was the decisive moment. The brothers were being offered the same choice they had faced years earlier. They could abandon a favored son of Rachel and return to Jacob with a story. Judah approached Joseph. He respectfully recounted the history of their conversations. Their father was old. Benjamin's full brother was dead, or so Jacob believed. Benjamin was the only remaining son of his mother, and Jacob loved him deeply. Judah did not criticize his father's favoritism, he simply described its reality. If the brothers returned without Benjamin, Jacob would see that the boy was missing and die from grief. Then Judah spoke about his pledge. He had guaranteed Benjamin's safety and would carry the guilt forever if he failed to bring him home. Finally, Judah made his request. Let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. The brother who once sold Joseph into slavery now offered himself as a slave in place of Benjamin. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? Judah asked. No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. The test was complete. The brothers had changed. Joseph could no longer control himself. He ordered every Egyptian attendant to leave the room. Then he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and news reached Pharaoh's household. Joseph spoke to his brothers in their own language. I am Joseph. Then came the question he had carried for years. Is my father still living? The brothers were unable to answer. They stood terrified before him. The ruler of Egypt was the brother they had thrown into a pit. The man who controlled whether their families ate or starved was the one they had sold. Joseph invited them to come closer. "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt." He did not deny their responsibility. He did not call their action a misunderstanding. They had sold him. Yet Joseph also saw another level of the story. He told them not to be consumed by grief or anger against themselves, because God had sent him ahead to preserve life. The famine had lasted 2 years, and 5 more years remained. God had positioned Joseph in Egypt to preserve a remnant of the family and save their lives through a great deliverance. "So then it was not you who sent me here, but God." Joseph was not declaring that the brothers had acted innocently or that evil had become good. He was explaining divine providence. Human beings had intended betrayal. God had acted through the same chain of events to preserve the covenant family. The brothers' guilt was real. God's sovereignty was greater. Joseph told them to return quickly to Jacob and report that God had made his son ruler over Egypt. The entire household was to come and settle in Goshen, close to Joseph, where they would be provided for during the remaining years of famine. Then Joseph embraced Benjamin and wept. Benjamin wept upon him. Joseph kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Only after this were they able to speak. The silence created by hatred in Genesis 37 was finally broken by reconciliation. Pharaoh heard that Joseph's brothers had arrived and was pleased. He offered them the best of Egypt and sent wagons to carry their children, wives, and father. Joseph gave each brother clothing, but Benjamin received additional silver and 5 sets of clothes. Once again, Benjamin was given more, but now the brothers were leaving with the knowledge that Joseph was alive and that the family was being restored. Before they departed, Joseph warned them, "Don't quarrel on the way. Even after reconciliation, the old habit of accusation could reappear. They might blame one another for the crime, for the years of silence, or for the danger they had faced." Joseph did not send them home to decide who was most guilty. He sent them home to bring their father. When they reached Canaan, they told Jacob, "Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt." Jacob was stunned and did not believe them. The sons then repeated Joseph's words and showed him the Egyptian wagons. Jacob's spirit revived. "My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." The family began the journey south. At Beersheba, Jacob offered sacrifices to the God of Isaac. This location carried memories of Abraham, Isaac, wells, covenants, and promises. But Egypt was outside Canaan. Jacob was leaving the promised land during a famine, just as Abraham had once done. Would this migration endanger the promise God spoke to Israel in a vision at night? "Jacob, Jacob," he answered, "Here I am." God told him not to be afraid to go down to Egypt. There, God would make him into a great nation. God would go with him, and God would surely bring him back. Joseph would also be present when Jacob died. The descent to Egypt was not a departure from God's plan. It was part of the path already revealed to Abraham generations earlier, when God said his descendants would live as strangers in a foreign land. Jacob's sons placed him, their children, and their wives in Pharaoh's wagons. They brought their livestock and possessions, and the entire family traveled to Egypt. Genesis records the names of those who went down with Jacob. The lists emphasize that this was not merely the migration of one old man. The developing people of Israel were entering Egypt together. Judah was set ahead to receive directions to Goshen. Then Joseph prepared his chariot and traveled to meet his father. When Joseph appeared before Jacob, he embraced him and wept for a long time. Jacob said that he was now ready to die because he had seen Joseph's face and knew he was alive. For more than 20 years, Jacob had mourned a son who stood before him in Egyptian clothing, carrying the authority of Pharaoh. Joseph prepared his family for an audience with the king. He explained that when Pharaoh asked about their occupation, they should identify themselves as shepherds. Egyptians generally regarded shepherding as detestable, a cultural separation that would help the family remain together in Goshen, rather than immediately being absorbed into Egyptian society. Joseph selected 5 brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. They explained that the famine was severe in Canaan and requested permission to live in Goshen. Pharaoh granted them the best part of the land. He also told Joseph to appoint capable men among them to care for the royal livestock. Then Joseph brought Jacob before Pharaoh. Jacob blessed the ruler of Egypt. Pharaoh asked his age. Jacob answered that the years of his pilgrimage had been 130. They had been few and difficult compared with the years of his ancestors. The man who had struggled for blessing all his life now stood before the most powerful ruler in the region and spoke as a pilgrim. Before leaving, Jacob blessed Pharaoh again. Joseph settled his father and brothers in the district of Ramses, within the best region of Egypt, and supplied the family with food. As the famine intensified, Joseph administered Egypt's resources. The people spent their money buying grain. When their money was gone, they exchanged livestock for food. The following year, they offered their land and labor to Pharaoh. Joseph acquired the land of Egypt for the crown, with the notable exception of land belonging to the priests, who received an allowance from Pharaoh. He then established a continuing policy. The people would farm the land and give 1/5 of the harvest to Pharaoh, keeping the remainder for seed and food. The Egyptians credited Joseph with saving their lives, though the system also greatly increased Pharaoh's control over the country. Genesis presents Joseph as the administrator whose preparation preserved Egypt during catastrophe. It also records the economic transformation without pausing to turn every action into a universal political model. Meanwhile, Israel lived in Goshen, acquired property, and multiplied greatly. The family had entered Egypt because of famine, but there it began growing into the nation promised to Abraham. Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years. When he knew his death was approaching, he called Joseph and asked him to swear that he would not bury him in Egypt. His body must be carried back to the family burial place in Canaan. Jacob bowed in worship as Joseph made the promise. Later, Joseph brought his 2 sons Manasseh and Ephraim to his sick father. Jacob recalled God's appearance at Luz or Bethel, where he had received the promises of fruitfulness and land. Then he declared that Ephraim and Manasseh would be counted as his own sons, standing alongside Reuben and Simeon. Through this act, Joseph effectively received the double portion of the firstborn. Each of his sons would become the ancestor of a tribe. Jacob's eyesight had become weak, echoing Isaac's blindness years earlier. But this time, the younger son's elevation would not come through disguise. Joseph positioned Manasseh, the firstborn, beneath Jacob's right hand and Ephraim beneath his left. Jacob crossed his arms, placing his right hand on Ephraim. Joseph attempted to correct him. He explained that Manasseh was the firstborn. Jacob refused. Manasseh would also become great, but Ephraim would become greater. The pattern seen throughout Genesis appeared again: Isaac over Ishmael, Jacob over Esau, Perez before Zerah, and now Ephraim before Manasseh. Human inheritance customs did not control the freedom of God's purpose. Jacob blessed Joseph through the 2 boys and spoke of the God before whom Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who had shepherded Jacob throughout his life, and the angel who had delivered him from harm. The former deceiver now described his life not as a triumph of cleverness, but as a life shepherded and redeemed by God. Then Jacob gathered all his sons to tell them what lay ahead. His final words were not equal expressions of praise. They exposed character, remembered past actions, and anticipated the futures of the tribes descending from them. Reuben, the firstborn, possessed dignity and strength, but he would not retain preeminence because he violated his father's bed. Simeon and Levi were condemned for their violence at Shechem. Jacob rejected their uncontrolled anger and declared that their descendants would be scattered within Israel. Judah, however, received the most royal blessing. His brothers would praise him. His hand would be upon the neck of his enemies. He was compared to a lion, and the language of rule and kingship was attached to his line. The man who once sold Joseph, but later offered himself for Benjamin, had become the brother through whom the royal line would continue. Zebulun's future was associated with the region of the sea. Issachar was compared with strength placed under burden. Dan would exercise judgment, though danger was also attached to his path. Gad would face raiders, but strike back. Asher's land would produce rich food. Naphtali received imagery of freedom and beauty. Joseph received an extended blessing of fruitfulness, strength, and divine help. Though attacked by those who hated him, his bow remained steady because of the mighty one of Jacob, the shepherd and rock of Israel. Benjamin was compared to a ravenous wolf, language anticipating the warlike reputation of his descendants. These sayings did not provide a complete history of every tribe, but they placed the sons inside the future of the nation. Jacob then repeated his burial instructions. He was to be placed in the cave of Machpelah, the field Abraham purchased from Ephron. Abraham and Sarah were buried there. Isaac and Rebekah were buried there. Jacob had buried Leah there. The family's permanent claim in Canaan remained a tomb. After finishing his instructions, Jacob drew his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Joseph threw himself upon his father, wept over him, and kissed him. He ordered the Egyptian physicians to embalm Jacob. The process took 40 days, and Egypt mourned for 70 days. Joseph asked Pharaoh for permission to carry Jacob's body to Canaan. Pharaoh agreed. A large company traveled with him: royal officials, elders of Egypt, Joseph's household, his brothers, chariots and horsemen. At the threshing floor of Atad near the Jordan, they held a great mourning ceremony for 7 days. The local Canaanites saw the grief and called the place Abel Mizraim, associated with the mourning of Egypt. Jacob's sons then carried his body to Machpelah and buried him according to his instructions. The old man had died in Egypt, but was laid to rest in the Promised Land. After the funeral, Joseph and the entire company returned to Egypt. Then the brothers became afraid. Their father was gone. They wondered whether Joseph's kindness had existed only for Jacob's sake. Perhaps Joseph had waited until after the burial to repay them for everything they had done. They sent a message claiming that before his death, Jacob instructed Joseph to forgive his brothers. Whether Jacob actually gave this command is not otherwise recorded. The brothers may still have been using their father's words to protect themselves. Then they came and threw themselves before Joseph. "We are your slaves." Once again they bowed, but Joseph wept. "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God?" He did not claim the right to control final judgment. Then Joseph gave the interpretation of his life that has echoed through generations. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." The same event carried two intentions. The brothers intended evil. God intended preservation. Divine providence did not turn their betrayal into innocence. It prevented their betrayal from having the final word. Joseph promised to provide for them and their children. He reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph remained in Egypt with his father's family. He lived to be 110 years old and saw several generations of Ephraim's descendants. The children of Manasseh's son Machir were also received into Joseph's family line. Before Joseph died, he spoke to his brothers and relatives, "I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Joseph made the Israelites swear that when God visited them, they would carry his bones out of Egypt. He died at 110 years old. His body was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. That is how Genesis ends. Not in Eden, not in Canaan, not with Abraham's descendants possessing the land. It ends with a coffin in Egypt. Yet the coffin is not a symbol of abandoned hope. Joseph refuses to let Egypt become the final home of Israel. His body waits for a future generation and a future deliverance. Genesis began with God creating life from an earth that was formless and empty. It ends in a foreign empire with the covenant family alive but far from the land. Between those two scenes, humanity rebelled, brothers shed blood, violence filled the earth, nations scattered, families deceived one another, and promises repeatedly appeared close to failure. But the promise continued. It survived Eden's exile. It survived the flood. It survived Sarah's barrenness. It survived Abraham's fear. It survived Jacob's deception. It survived family rivalry. It survived the pit, slavery, prison, and famine. Genesis does not hide the weakness of its central figures because its message does not depend upon human perfection. The book reveals a God who judges. Evil remembers mercy, calls unlikely people, works through broken families, and remains faithful across generations. Creation has been damaged, but not abandoned. The serpent has not yet been finally defeated. The nations have not yet received the full blessing promised through Abraham. The descendants of Israel do not yet possess the land, and the coffin of Joseph still waits in Egypt. The first book closes, but the journey is not finished. A new Pharaoh will rise. The growing family will become an oppressed people. And the God who promised to bring them back will call another man, Moses, to stand before the throne of Egypt. Genesis ends far from Eden and far from the promised land, but the promise is still alive.